Game of Thrones, The Attack of the Northern Wolf. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 1, Robb and Bloodwind. Ugh, so uncomfortable. Waves of dizziness and strange sensations from the stomach acid surged towards Lin Li, who was gradually regaining consciousness. Robb, how do you feel? Can you stand up? A caring greeting, that was definitely not in Chinese, sounded in his ears, but Lin Li instantly understood the meaning. What language is this? Robb. Lin Li, who was confused, shook his head left and right when he heard this, as if to get rid of the dizzy and nauseous feeling. I don't know if the two shakes worked, but the dizziness quickly subsided, and Lin Li slowly opened his eyes. I saw a young man with dark brown hair and handsome and cold features, staring at me with his pair of grey eyes. Seeing Lin Li open his eyes, he supported Lin Li's right shoulder with both hands, and pulled Lin Li up from the cold ground full of gravel. Brother, what happened just now? Why did you suddenly faint? Seeing Lin Li stand up, a young boy with chestnut hair and delicate face, about 10 years old, asked softly on his left. Lin Li, who had not yet figured out the situation, had no idea how to answer the boy's question. Hey, Robb, did you sneak out to find Rose last night? And then, did you fight all night? At this time, a thin young man with a fair complexion and a lewd smile on his face, men know everything, approached. He handed the leather water bag taken from the horse to Lin Li and joked. Hush, be quiet. Look, Lord Eddard is about to start. The black-haired young man saw the young man with a lewd smile on his face talking about adult topics in front of the little boy. He frowned and interrupted the topic. Only then did Lin Li have time to look at the environment he was in. This was in a small valley made up of green shade and gravel. A dozen soldiers in shining armor, swords on their waists, holding flags, stood in a circle at the top of the valley. About 5 meters to the right and in front of Lin Li and his companions, there was a slightly flat stone platform. On it stood several tall men with burly figures. 3 of them were wearing black cloaks made of animal fur, and they looked extraordinary. The man on the far left was very distinctive. He tied his grey hair on both sides under his chin, and looked like he had a grey beard. On the far right was a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a respectful demeanor. He held a long-handled broadsword with a scabbard, made of animal fur in his hands. Standing in the center was a middle-aged man with a serious expression. His entire face was long, his neatly trimmed beard had begun to turn grey, and he had brown hair and grey eyes. Even if he didn't speak, he just stood there silently. The whole person exuded a kind of majestic aura of a superior. In front of the 3 of them, there stood 2 soldiers wearing dome helmets and standard armor. They escorted a male prisoner dressed in black, and with an extremely haggard face, and pressed his head tightly against the groove of a wooden stake covered with black and brown spots. The majestic man standing in the center nodded gently to the man holding the sword on the right. The man walked forward respectfully, and placed the long-handled broadsword held in both hands in front of him. Clang. The long-handled broadsword with cold light was unsheathed, and a unique crisp sound of metal friction rang in everyone's ears. The man holding the sword quietly stepped back a few steps with the animal fur scabbard. The majestic man stood in front of the prisoner with the sword in both hands, and said calmly and steadily, as the king of the Andals and the first men, the 7 kingdoms. Boom. Seeing this scene and hearing the words of judgment from the majestic man's mouth, Lin Li, who had always felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity in his heart, felt as if his head was struck by a bolt of lightning. This is the famous opening scene of Wolf House in Game of Thrones. I stayed up late to work overtime, and I traveled through time. Is this too much of a joke? No matter how Lin Li's mind was turned upside down at the moment, the sentence from the majestic man's mouth had come to an end. I, the Duke of Winterfell and the Warden of the North, Eddard of the Stark family, hereby sentence you to death. Swish, dang. After Eddard Stark finished speaking, he held the sword with both hands and chopped off the prisoner's head neatly, with a skillful movement that made people feel creepy. The prisoner's head rolled like a ball, and the bright red blood spurted out of the headless corpse, adding a new color to the dark brown wooden stake. This extremely exciting beheading scene did not touch Lin Li at all, as if he had already seen it all the time. Seeing that Lin Li had no abnormality on his face, the black-haired young man, that is, Jon Snow, he let go of the hands that had been supporting Lin Li and took the lead in walking towards the horse behind him. As he turned around, he whispered to the little boy Brandon Stark, who was gritting his teeth and witnessing the execution on Lin Li's left, "You did a good job. TSK. If I hadn't brought the water bag to Robb, I would have given the ice to Lord Eddard." Theon Greyjoy curled his lips, muttered with a little dissatisfaction, turned around and followed Jon. "Brother, let's go together." Brandon swallowed his saliva, tugged at Lin Li's black cloak with his right hand, and said softly, "Brother? By the way, I'm Robb Stark, the young wolf of the Wolf family, the future king of the North, the biggest tragedy of the Red Wedding." Lin Li just thought of this, and a lot of information and memories suddenly flooded his mind. Brandon looked at Lin Li with a worried look on his face, who was standing there with his eyes wide open, and hesitated in his heart whether he should call out again his elder brother who behaved abnormally today. "Bran, do you understand why I want to kill him?" At this time, Eddard, wearing a leather glove on his right hand, walked to the two brothers without stopping. He first glanced at Lin Li, who was standing still in a daze with a water bag in his hand, and then turned to Brandon and asked, "Because he is a deserter from the Night's Watch?" Hearing his father's question, Brandon suppressed his thoughts, turned to look at Eddard, and replied with pursed lips, "Then why do I have to execute him personally?" "Because our Stark family adheres to its own honor and follows ancient traditions. Yes, the one who sentences the death penalty must do it himself." "Bran, you go first. I'll say a few words to Robb." Eddard heard Brandon's answer and nodded with satisfaction. Looking at Brandon's back as he turned away, he continued to say to Lin Li, who was standing there in a daze, "Robb, I have told you before that excessive exercise will not make you stronger, but will only lead to a series of bad consequences. No matter how strong a lone wolf is, it cannot beat a lion. The glory of the Stark family has never been built on a certain person. Only when our family is united and we, the people of the North, are united, can we get through the winter together. Don't train these 2 days. Take a break. The next time something similar happens in the territory, you will personally lead people to capture and judge them." "Yes, father." At this time, Lin Li, who had just completed the integration of information and memory in his brain, Robb Stark, answered Ed respectfully. Looking at his eldest son, who was no shorter than himself, Ed patted Robb on the shoulder and walked towards the horse. What he didn't see was that the eldest son behind him had a flashing look in his eyes, which was fiery and firm. "I'm Lin Li, an ordinary office worker in Blue Star, China. I also grew up in Winterfell. Robb Stark, the heir of the Duke of the North. I will protect my relatives and friends, and my future will never be a tragedy." Garlum. Pulling the stopper of the leather water bag in his hand, Robb raised his head and drank it in big gulps. It seemed that he wanted to use the cold spring water to extinguish the raging fire in his heart. The Stark family was unusually calm on the way back. Eddard Stark drove his horse in front of the team without saying a word. It was not without reason that he was called the Silent Wolf when he was young. The grey-haired Winterfell coach Sir Roderick Castle and the captain of the personal guard Jory Castle, who kept the ice, followed closely behind. Jon and Brandon were obviously closer. The two walked side by side and talked softly, and next to Robb was Theon, who kept chattering. He kept complaining that Robb sneaked out of the castle last night without calling him. It could have been a threesome, and it was endless fun. Of course, Robb didn't listen to his words. He knew that he only had a few months left to prepare. He had already planned countless development plans in his mind. Of course, he also killed countless plans. After the two souls merged, riding, archery, swordsmanship, etc. were no longer a problem. These were the results of Robb's training for more than 10 years, and they had long been transformed into body memory, as if he had trained them himself. However, the North had been peaceful for 9 years, and there were only some bandits, scattered wild men, murderers, etc. Usually, there were only some bandits, scattered wild men, murderers, etc. Robb couldn't have an excuse to develop his own private power. Only his father Eddard was qualified to summon and dispatch the guards of Winterfell and the vassals from all over the North. Of course, after a few months, when his father Eddard was imprisoned in the dungeon in King's Landing, then the acting city lord Robb would also have the right to summon. But waiting for history to repeat itself was definitely not what Robb wanted now. When they were halfway through their journey, at a dilapidated stone bridge, Theon, who felt that Robb's silence today was boring, took the initiative to ride a horse and act as a scout, and found the body of a strong stag. Led by their father, Eddard, they found the body of a female direwolf and 5 furry, extremely cute direwolf cubs under the bridge. Then there was a discussion, and finally Eddard listened to Jon's opinion, and made the decision to adopt. The excited Brandon first picked up the direwolf cub he had chosen and walked towards the stone bridge above. Seeing his son's happy look, Eddard shook his head slightly with a doting look, and also turned around and walked upward. Robb took a few steps forward and naturally picked up the direwolf cub with the largest size, smoky grey fur and yellow eyes among the remaining 4. You were originally supposed to be called Grey Wind, but now, you belong to me, Bloodwind. Looking at the extremely docile direwolf cub in front of him, Robb changed its name slightly, in order to warn himself of the tragedy of the Red Wedding. Low-level extraordinary life detected. Whether to sign a blood contract. When Robb decided on the name Bloodwind in his heart, a line of Chinese characters composed of blood appeared in front of him. P.S. I have watched the Game of Thrones series many times, but I haven't read the novels much. I always thought that the young wolf master was brave and good at fighting, upright and kind, and it was a pity that he died. I hope that the fusion of the 2 souls will allow him to start a new life. The original plot and characters are mainly based on the original novel. Please don't argue about it. Of course, if there are common sense questions, please point them out. Chapter 2 Blood Contract. After carefully reading the bloody words in front of him several times, Robb was not in a hurry to sign the contract. He leaned over and put down Bloodwind in his hand, and the bloody words in front of him suddenly disappeared. He tried to pick up another direwolf cub, and the bloody words still did not appear. Finally, when Robb picked up Bloodwind again, the words appeared in front of him again as he thought. Robb, let me help you. Jon found another wolf cub of a different color. Theon walked up and took the remaining 3 cubs into his arms and said, "It is destined, but there are also changes. Let's go home." Confirming that only Bloodwind can trigger his golden finger, Robb hugged the direwolf cub more carefully, and at the same time, he said something that made Theon puzzled. What happened to him today? Looking sideways at this brother with a different surname, who had been together for nearly 10 years, Theon suddenly felt that he was a little strange. When Robb and his party returned to Winterfell safely, his mother Catelyn Tully, Sansa, Arya, Rickon, Maester Luwin, Hodder and others had already been waiting at the gate of the main castle of Winterfell. After greeting each other one by one according to the noble tradition, Robb's 3 brothers and sisters happily divided up the 3 direwolf cubs in Theon's arms. Catelyn wanted to ask him in detail when she heard Robb fainted suddenly, but Robb, who had a little secret, was really impatient. He apologized to his parents, hugged his bloody wind, and returned to the main castle first. The servants would naturally come to notify him about dinner. Robb's room is located on the far left of the 2nd floor of the main castle. The room has good lighting, is bright and spacious, but the interior is simple and completely practical. In fact, there is no gorgeously decorated bedroom in the entire Winterfell. There is a large candlestick in each corner of the room. When the candlesticks are lit at night, the whole room can be brightly lit. A row of fist-sized wooden pipe openings are embedded above the wall where the door is located. Winterfell was originally built on a hot spring, so the hot spring's heat is transported through these pipes between the castle walls to warm the rooms of Winterfell. This makes Winterfell more comfortable than other castles in the harsh winter in the north. In fact, this is equivalent to a super central air conditioner that can only heat. In the middle of the house is a large solid wood bed covered with thick furs. Opposite the wooden bed is a wooden desk. On the left side of the desk is a wardrobe, and on the right side is a washstand. These are all the furniture in the room. Bang! Closing the door, Robb walked to the bed in a few steps, and leaned over to gently place Bloodwind in the thick fur. Woo, I don't know if it's because he's hungry, or for some other reason. Bloodwind on the bed opened his eyes, sniffed everywhere with his nose, and made a subtle wolf cry from his mouth. Sign the blood contract. After returning to his room, Robb couldn't wait to activate his golden finger. Start signing the blood contract. As soon as the Chinese characters in front of Robb's eyes changed, Bloodwind's yellow eyes on the bed instantly turned blood red, and it bit Robb's right hand. Although Bloodwind was still a cub, as a direwolf born to be a killer, the sharp teeth in its mouth easily cut the skin of his right hand, and blood immediately flowed out. The blood from Robb's right hand did not drip onto the bed, it was all absorbed by Bloodwind. Gradually, Bloodwind and Robb's bodies exuded a hazy red light, rendering the entire room with a sunset-like scenery. The blood contract is signed. About a minute later, the red light gradually sank into Robb and Bloodwind's bodies. The blood in Bloodwind's eyes faded away, and when its pair of yellow eyes saw Robb's right hand bleeding again, it took the initiative to stretch out its warm and moist tongue to lick his wound. After the contract was signed, Robb suddenly felt a sense of spiritual connection with Bloodwind. He seemed to be able to feel its apology, as well as its hunger and thirst in his head. When he looked at Bloodwind intently, the bloody writing appeared again. Name, Bloodwind. Contractor, Robb Stark. Constitution. 1. Speed. 2. Strength. 1. Clan, Psychic direwolf. 6. Blood contract points. 0. The information in the bloody writing was easy to understand for Robb, who had experienced the Blue Star game. The first item was omitted. The second item was Bloodwind's measurements. As a newborn wolf cub, this data was easy to understand. Robb was looking forward to Bloodwind's future growth. The third item must refer to the 6 cubs harvested by the Stark family. It was just that I didn't expect Bloodwind and the others to have the prefix psychic. It made sense that these 6 cubs were all of extraordinary biological bloodline. After all, in the original drama, Brandon had no one to guide or train him, but he could spontaneously communicate with his direwolf. And when I last saw her Nymeria, the blood grey wolf pack with direwolf bloodline that she led was not as big as him. Robb guessed that if Bloodwind was just an ordinary direwolf, the two of them might not be able to sign a blood contract at all. Blood contract points. It should be something that helps Bloodwind grow quickly. This fourth item is the most critical part of his golden finger. So, how should he get it? Robb stared at the bloody handwriting in front of him, thinking about the possibility of obtaining blood contract points in his mind. Woo. Looking at Robb alone in a daze, Bloodwind turned his furry body a little restlessly and let out a low roar. Hungry. Thirsty. Hungry. When these thoughts continued to be conveyed for a long time, Robb came back from his meditation. Putting this little foodie who just wanted to eat alone on the bed, he opened the door and went out. About half an hour later, Robb returned to his room with a small wooden basin. As soon as he opened the door, Robb tried to give Bloodwind the idea of eating in his mind. Bloodwind, your nutritious dinner is here. But Bloodwind lay lazily on the bed, motionless, probably because he was too hungry to move. Seeing Bloodwind's look, Robb tilted his head to think for a moment, then put the small wooden basin on the desk, and turned back to search in his closet. The small wooden basin contained dog milk. On the way back today, Sir Roderick said that he had a red bitch who had just given birth, and most of the pups had died. It was just right to milk and feed the 6 direwolves. The clothes of the northerners were generally thick woolen. Robb finally found a linen lining and cut it into the size of a palm with his sword. He put one end of the cloth into the dog milk basin, and the white liquid instantly soaked the cloth. Robb held the small wooden basin in his right hand and held the cloth in his left hand to Bloodwind's mouth. Bloodwind seemed to smell the dog milk. He first stretched out his tongue to lick the cloth, then opened his mouth and bit the front end of the cloth into his mouth to suck. After repeatedly feeding Bloodwind all the dog milk in the small wooden basin, Robb, who had been in this position, felt a little sore in his waist and legs. However, looking at Bloodwind who had eaten and drunk enough and fell asleep on the bed, he actually felt a sense of accomplishment as a father for the first time. When Robb was struggling to feed Bloodwind, the sky outside was gradually getting dark. At this time, a male servant knocked on the door and came in, informing Robb that dinner was ready, and helped him light the candlesticks in the room. Robb nodded and agreed, then dressed up and went out. After walking along the corridor that was still dark with the candlesticks lit for more than 10 minutes, Robb came to the banquet hall from the main castle. The Stark ancestors were obviously very hospitable. The banquet hall was built quite large, and the entire hall was built of grey stone, and hung with Stark's direwolf flags. As soon as Robb pushed open the door made of oak and steel, he saw 8 long tables placed inside the hall. These long tables were separated by the middle corridor, with 4 on each side. If all of them were filled, at least several hundred people would be needed. Of course, these were for entertaining ordinary guests. They, the members of the Stark family and the noble guests, would dine at the long table on the high platform in the hall. At this time, the entire Stark family had already sat down at the long table on the high platform, including Jon and Theon. When there were no distinguished guests, Catelyn could still tolerate a certain bastard for Eddard's sake. During dinner, Eddard and Catelyn tore eye bread and whispered to each other. The voice of Theon was basically the only one at the table. He boasted loudly to Robb's 4 brothers and sisters about how he found the bodies of the stag and the direwolf. Robb answered at the beginning of the dinner, and after Catelyn asked about his health, she ate the food silently. After all, he had too many things to think about and sort out. When he was so careless and finished most of the food on the plate, a bloody handwriting suddenly appeared in front of him. Blood contract points +1 what? Can you get blood contract points by eating? Eating blood contract points, which surprised Robb. Robb, what are you so happy about? Arya, who was sitting on Robb's right, happened to see his expression. The curious girl immediately asked, Arya, I found that eating can help you grow. Robb, who had obtained the blood contract, was no longer as worried as before. He smiled and answered Arya, then turned to the maid standing beside him and said, please give me another dinner of the same size. Humph. I won't pay attention to you. You eat so much, you're such a glutton. Arya, who has a big appetite, has never grown much, which has always been one of her weaknesses. Hearing Robb's words, Arya felt that he was teasing her. She immediately turned her face, left these words, and ignored Robb. Thanks to the first book review by ZHIping, as well as the recommendation votes and collections from other readers. Please support this book. All the data in the new book are very important. Thank you. Chapter 3 Seeking Help. Burp. Robb had just eaten the last bit of cheese on the plate when he couldn't help but burp with a full burp. Fortunately, he and the maid standing beside him were the only ones at the table, otherwise he would have been scolded by Catelyn. The second dinner that he had just barely stuffed into his stomach did not bring Robb any blood contract points. This broke his idea of relying on eating to earn points. Well, if he really wanted to earn points this way, Robb would definitely be fatter than King Robert Baratheon in the future. After dinner, it should have been Robb's routine sword training time, but today he went straight back to his room. This was partly because his father Eddard asked him to rest for 2 days, and partly because he wanted to rest well. Back in his room, Robb immediately looked at Bloodwind, who was sleeping soundly. Bloody handwriting appeared as he thought. Maybe because of the blood contract points gained from dinner, there was a plus sign behind Bloodwind's measurements. Robb lowered his head and pondered for a while, and as soon as he thought about it, the blood contract points in his vision disappeared. A red mist as thick as a chopstick rose from him and then poured into the sleeping Bloodwind's body, and Bloodwind's physical data rose to 2. That red mist is the blood contract point. Robb gently touched the stubble on his chin and had some guesses in his mind. Calculated by gaining 1 blood contract point a day, he felt that at this growth rate, within a month, Bloodwind's measurements would be several times that of his brothers and sisters. As for why he first clicked on the physical fitness, this was also after careful consideration. Now this world is real to him, not as simple as watching a drama from a god's perspective. There is no one in Winterfell who can raise dire wolves. If Bloodwind, who is still a cub, dies for any reason, it will be the most fatal loss for him. Try to improve the physical attributes in the early stage, which can ensure that Bloodwind survives to adulthood in the safest way. It is not too late to improve the agility and strength attributes later. After clicking on the attributes of Bloodwind, Robb suddenly felt a little tired. He found 2 thick clothes in the closet and spread them on the ground, then gently picked up Bloodwind and put them in. He didn't sleep in the same bed with Bloodwind because Robb liked to turn over when he slept in Blue Star. Now he had to eliminate all possibilities that might harm Bloodwind. Phew. Comfortable. The thick fur on the solid wood bed was indeed soft. As soon as Robb lay down, He felt like he was stuck in a pile of cotton and couldn't help groaning. My advantages. First, I know the general direction of the future and some important figures. Second, Bloodwind is a golden finger. Third, I'm the eldest son of the noble bloodline of the North. But, can I really deal with the shrewd Tywin Lannister and Daenerys Targaryen who has 3 dragons in the future? Oh, and there are the wildlings outside the wall. Finally, there are the White Walkers. Robb, lying on the bed, thought about his advantages and the enemies he would face in the future. Perhaps because he was too tired, he fell into a deep sleep in a few minutes. Early the next morning, Robb was awakened by his body's biological clock. As soon as he got dressed and got out of bed, Bloodwind had already bitten his trouser legs, conveying the emotion of being hungry. Great. This guy is a completely emotionless eating machine. Robb leaned over and touched Bloodwind's furry head, then went out to make breakfast for it. After a busy time, after serving Master Bloodwind, Robb came to the washstand to wash. He happily buried his head in the wash basin prepared by the manservant in advance, shook it left and right a few times, and suddenly raised his head. In the mirror of the washstand, a young man with blue eyes, reddish brown hair, and a sturdy figure was looking at him. Although Robb's appearance is relatively mature, he looks heroic and handsome, with his own unique temperament. I'm Robb Stark. After looking at this strange and familiar face in the mirror for a few minutes, after silently reciting in his heart, he wiped his face with a towel and turned to put on the noble casual clothes. The breakfast of the Stark family is still very rich. Robb, who feels that his stomach is empty, eats heartily without any image. Robb, you had 2 dinners last night. Why are you still so hungry this morning? Eddard threw the grapes in his hand into his mouth and asked Robb with a puzzled look. I don't know, maybe I'm still growing. Father. Hearing his father's question, Robb quickly swallowed the food in his mouth and answered. Father, there may be a bunch of fat pigs that can only shit in his stomach. Hearing Robb's words, Arya remembered what he said last night and couldn't help but want to tease him back. Arya, how can you talk like that? You have finished eating, go find Sister Mordane and learn today's lessons. Sansa, stay with your sister. Hearing Arya's words, Catelyn frowned and said aloud, yes, mother. Sansa and Arya heard the words and responded in unison. Sansa, who was affected, looked at Arya with hatred, lifted her skirt to her parents, and left first. Arya stuck out her tongue at Robb, made a face, and turned and ran out. Robb, if you feel any discomfort, remember to tell Mr. Lewin. Catelyn was still worried about Robb's health. Yes, mother. After breakfast, Robb did not get the blood contract points, but he was not in a hurry. After all, there was dinner. Moreover, he felt that blood contract points were not as simple as eating. After adding attributes to Bloodwind yesterday, his sudden fatigue was a bit abnormal. The next time should have been Robb's routine archery training. Just like sword training, his father Eddard gave him a holiday, so he immediately went back to his room to increase his intimacy with Bloodwind. About an hour later, a male servant informed Robb that it was time to go to the meeting hall. As the eldest son and heir of Winterfell, it was his duty and responsibility to accompany Eddard to deal with the trivial matters of the territory every day. Of course, the decision-making power was in Eddard's hands. Usually, he just accompanied and watched and learned. When Robb rushed to the meeting hall, his father Eddard and Mr. Lewin were sitting on the high platform of the meeting hall. Captain Jory, the captain of the guard, led 2 fully armed soldiers to guard the entrance of the hall, while the people of the territory stood behind them in line waiting. When Robb sat down on the left side of Eddard, today's territorial meeting officially began. In these peaceful years, most of the matters were trivial. Either the house was old and collapsed, and the lord was asked for help, or the cattle and sheep of the East family crossed the border and ate the grass of the West family. Robb's head swelled, and he felt sleepy after hearing these. After all, the criminal law in Westeros is very severe, and even stealing is a serious crime. In some places, the punishment is as light as cutting off hands and feet, while in some places, it is directly hanged or sent to the Night's Watch. The composition of the people of Winterfell is simple, not as complicated as that of King's Landing. Therefore, there are few crimes. Let me in, I have something urgent to see the Lord. A roar outside the door of the meeting hall refreshed Robb, who was a little sleepy. Eddard winked at Jory, and he turned to go out. Then, a young man in simple clothes with blood on his body followed him in. "Lord, I am. Call me Lord." A young man who was about the same age as Robb just started to speak, but Jory interrupted and corrected his address. "Lord, I'm a villager from Dunglan village. Last night at dinner time, a group of soldiers broke into our village and burned, killed, and looted. I was ordered by village chief Wood to sneak out to ask for help. How many people are there? What weapons do they use? Are they wearing armor? Are there any family emblems on their bodies? Did you see them clearly?" Hearing this, Eddard frowned and asked. These questions made the young man stunned. He recalled in his mind and said hesitantly, "There are about 14 or 15 people. They are basically wearing leather armor. Most of them use long swords and shields, and 2 or 3 use bows and arrows. As for the emblem, oh, right. There is a mark in this shape on the shield in one person's hand." After speaking, the young man made an X with both hands. "I'm afraid he is talking about the flayed family emblem of the Bolton family, Lord Eddard." Hearing this, Mr. Lewin turned to Eddard and said, "The Boltons? Mr. Lewin, send a raven to ask the Boltons what's going on." "Yes, I'll go to the crow's nest now." Eddard bowed his head and pondered for a moment, then immediately gave an order to Mr. Lewin. Then he turned to Robb and asked, "Robb, how do you feel today?" "No problem, father." "Well, go back and prepare now, and set off for Eastwood Village. I'll have Jory take 20 people to wait for you at the East Gate." "Yes." Robb nodded and agreed, and immediately got up and returned to the main castle. Looking at the back of his eldest son, Eddard gave Jory a few words of advice, and then continued to deal with other matters. Because the situation was urgent, Robb hurried back to his room, called the male servant, and explained how to feed Bloodwind. Then, he changed the noble casual clothes he wore for the meeting into leather armor. Just as Robb was changing clothes, Jon and Theon must have heard the news and came together, saying that they would go together. Jon's swordsmanship was extraordinary, and Theon's archery was also very good. It will be safer with the 2 of them together. Robb thought about it and agreed immediately. He believed that his father Eddard would agree to add 2 more people. If it really doesn't work, the worst that can happen is to replace 2 soldiers from Jorah's team. Robb and his 2 companions passed through the bridge passage in the north of the main castle and went directly to the armory. Standard male armor, fine swords, longbows, short knives, and daggers are all available. The 3 of them helped each other put on the standard male armor commonly seen in the north. After getting all the weapons, they rode on the Winterfell war horses led out of the stables by the servants, and headed towards the East Gate with great momentum. Well, the first 3 chapters are nearly 10,000 words, and the foreshadowing and settings have been completed. Since the young wolf is the entry point, some of the original plot is inevitable, but I will try my best to add my own original plot, and write something new. I hope everyone will read it every day. This is very important. Thank you. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 4, Pursuit. Eastwood Village is located northeast of Winterfell. It takes about a day's walk to Winterfell, and half a day to reach it by horse. This is a village built between the White Knife River and Sheep's Head Mountain. Relying on fishing and mountain products, the whole village is relatively wealthy. There are more than a dozen farmhouses in the village, a council hall and a watchtower, and public security is maintained by several militiamen selected by the village chief. Sam, who came to Winterfell for help, is the youngest member of the militiamen in Eastwood Village. At this moment, Sam, who can't ride a horse, sits behind Jory, staring blankly at the ruins of Eastwood Village, where black smoke occasionally rises, and charred corpses are scattered all over the ground. 7 hells. This place is simply horrible. Theon rode his horse to look around, but didn't find a single survivor, and couldn't help but sigh. Jon didn't speak, but from the way he frowned, and bit his gums, he was furious. This peaceful and wealthy Eastwood Village ceased to exist in one night. Robb rode his horse through the ruins. The air was still filled with the stench of burning, and the faint smell of meat. Seeing this tragic scene, he only had an angry look on his face, and did not have any discomfort. Instead, He observed carefully. Most of the ruins were charred corpses. The few that were not burned were all broken limbs and bodies, with large and small wounds on them. He couldn't imagine what the villagers of Dunglin village had experienced before they died. The tragic scene made Robb very depressed, but his mind was extremely active. He scanned the ruins with sharp eyes, not missing any abnormal places. He had made up his mind to make the murderers who did such things receive the punishment they deserved. Woo. Why? A heartbreaking cry came from behind. It was Sam's voice. My lords, please come here. A soldier from Winterfell seemed to have discovered something and shouted at Robb and others. Robb and others heard the roar and drove their horses towards the soldier. This is the meeting hall of Dunglin village. Thanks to the yellow mud wrapped rough stone construction structure, although the exterior was smoked black, the interior was not affected by the fire. Robb was far away. When he arrived at the meeting hall and dismounted to enter, he saw Jon walking out with a gloomy face and stopped Sam, whose face was still wet with tears. What's in there? Let me in. Let me in. Sam, who was stopped by Jon, suddenly burst out with suppressed emotions and kept struggling hard to enter the meeting hall. Snap. Jory attacked from behind and knocked out the out of control Sam. Robb looked at the unconscious Sam, bit his lip, and stepped into the meeting hall. At this time, more than a dozen Winterfell soldiers were standing quietly in the meeting hall. They stood there silently, and anger rose in everyone's eyes. Robb pushed aside a soldier in front of him and saw the scene inside that was like hell on earth. More than a dozen naked women who had already died. They were in a big litter shape, with their limbs nailed to the 3 lowest walls of the meeting hall. 2 or 3 of them died by slitting their throats, and the rest were covered with blood holes. Some had their stomachs cut open and their internal organs spilled all over the floor, and some had most of their skin peeled off. Crunch. Crunch. Robb felt a fire rising from his internal organs, and he gnashed his teeth until they made a clattering sound. Suddenly, he saw one of the women move her fingers. There are still people alive. Robb took 2 steps at a time and hurried to the side of the woman with blood holes all over her body. White. The woman with disheveled hair and unclear face and blood holes all over her body. After seeing the direwolf family emblem on Robb's mail armor, she weakly uttered a word and then hung her head and died. Robb, who had no time to speak, heard this word. His mind immediately emerged, and he had just paid special attention to a row of horseshoe prints heading southwest. White Harbor. The murderers went to White Harbor in the Bite Bay. Combining the map of the north in his mind, Robb acted instantly. Captain Jory, leave 2 people to look after Sam and collect the bodies. The rest of you set off immediately. As night fell, in a leeward col near the lower reaches of the White Blade River, more than a dozen soldiers in leather armor were sitting cross-legged in a circle around a crackling campfire enjoying dinner. Dick took a bite of the roasted brown leg of lamb in his hand, picked up the wine bag filled with inferior beer, and poured it into his mouth. A middle-aged man with yellow teeth looked at the roasted leg of lamb in Dick's hand with envy. He cracked the hard black bread in his hand and asked Dick with a smile, Captain Dick, is your cousin really an officer in the King's Landing City Guard? Is there any need to ask? Captain Dick often communicates with his cousin via Raven. His cousin is a big shot in King's Landing. Hearing someone questioning Dick, a confidant beside him immediately replied, this time we are risking our heads to follow Captain Dick, so we can feel at ease if we ask clearly. Pa. Dick, who was feasting, saw the yellow-toothed man and the other soldiers staring at him, waiting for an answer. He put down the roasted leg of lamb in his hand, patted his grease-covered hands, and said loudly, this time, starting from the Dreadfort territory, all the money we got from the looted 3 villages will be divided equally among everyone when we arrive at King's Landing. I think this is what you care about most. Secondly, as long as you are still willing to follow me, I will find a way to get you into the capital garrison. You have followed me for so many years, and you know that my promise, Dick, will always come true. After Dick finished speaking, the soldiers sitting around looked at each other and cheered in tacit understanding. Long live Captain Dick. We will follow Lord Dick until death. Lord Dick. Dick stretched out his hand to suppress them, and seeing that the soldiers' excitement had calmed down a little, he continued, now is not the time to celebrate. Ramsay Snow, that bastard must have been chasing us. The village we looted yesterday belonged to the Stark family. When they get the news in 2 days, they will definitely come to chase us. If we offend these two big families, there will be no place for us in the north. However, by the time they catch up to White Harbor, we will have been on the ship to King's Landing. Haha, by then, we can book 2 or 3 skilled women in White Harbor in advance and write greetings to the lords of the two big families on their buttocks. Well, to be honest, we are unlucky too. We were ambushed by that group of wildlings when we were on duty. Yeah. I don't know how those damn wildlings got around the last half. Fortunately, we ran fast. They are not human, they are beasts. I saw with my own eyes that old Hank had his neck bitten off by a wildling. Hey, if we didn't run away, we would have been eaten by the wildlings. If we had run away, we would have been skinned by the bastard. Fortunately, Captain Dick was here. Dick's words were still very effective. They made the soldiers feel much more at ease. After listening to Dick's words, they started chatting. Divide the money equally? Humph, wait until we get to King's Landing. Dick looked around at the Dreadfort soldiers, including his confidants, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. He judged that the pursuers were at least 2 riding days away from them, and Dick and others had no sense of urgency. After eating and drinking, no one stayed to keep watch, and they all fell to the ground and fell asleep. As time passed, the night gradually faded, and the first rays of sunlight bloomed on the horizon. Hoof clack. Hoof clack. Hoof clack. The faint sound gradually grew, and Dick, who was more alert, immediately broke out of his dreamland, sat up like a frightened rabbit, and stretched his neck to look at the source of the sound. In the direction of the rising sun, a group of black figures rushed straight towards them. Dick reacted immediately, stood up suddenly, and yelled loudly, "Get up! Get up quickly! Enemy attack! Enemy attack!" Chapter 5 Cavalry Raid. Quickly gather and line up. Infantry defense formation. Although the Dreadfort soldiers were not very vigilant, their basic qualities as northern soldiers were quite high. When they heard Dick's roar, they immediately stood up. In a minute or two, they drew their swords and shields to form a horizontal defense posture. Dick, whose voice was a little hoarse, put on his mail armor with the help of his confidants. He was the only one in the group of soldiers who had mail armor. When they encountered a sudden attack by cavalry, Dick and others lined up on the spot to defend. This was not because they had no war horses. It was because the horses of the raiding cavalry had fully accelerated within this distance. In this state, Dick and others could only lose if they barely confronted them. Archers, shoot freely. The rest of you hold the formation. The formation must not be messed up. As the distance shortened, Dick could see clearly that the number of the raiding cavalry was only a few more than Thiz. With his rich combat experience, as long as they could defend against the first wave of cavalry attacks, they would have hope of winning. After hearing Dick's order, their only 2 archers began to shoot and kill the enemy. But the charging cavalrymen were all wearing iron helmets and mail armor. Unless they were shot in the neck, eyes or other vulnerable places, they were basically ignored. One of the cavalrymen was unlucky and was shot in the head of his warhorse by an arrow. In an instant, he fell to the ground with his horse, and it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. Hoof clack. Hoof clack. Hoof clack. Giloo. The yellow fang soldier in the defense line looked at the cavalry who were already in front of him and listened to the thunderous sound of horse hooves. He swallowed nervously, stabbed the horse's belly. Captain Dick's roar came to his ears. The yellow fang soldier held the shield in his left hand and stabbed the belly of the warhorse in his right hand with a one-handed sword. The sharp one-handed sword instantly penetrated the soft belly of the warhorse. Under the action of inertia, the wound was instantly torn open by at least 30 or 40 centimeters, and a large amount of bright red blood spurted out. Whis! The warhorse cried out in grief and fell to the ground. The yellow fang soldier had achieved his goal, but he was dizzy and his mouth was bleeding from the heavy impact of the warhorse on his shield. This uncomfortable feeling only lasted for a very short time, because a long sword pierced through the back of his head, and his bloody eyeball pierced out of his eye socket. Just now, the yellow fang soldier's vision was blocked by the huge warhorse, so he didn't see it. The cavalryman on the warhorse seemed to have predicted his move. Before his long sword pierced into the horse's belly, the cavalryman squatted on the saddle skillfully, and with the force of stepping on the saddle, he rushed forward. He crossed the Yellow Fang soldier's defensive line, rolled twice on the ground to relieve the force, and immediately stood up, turned around and stabbed the Yellow Fang soldier in the back of the head with a sword. Of course, not every cavalryman has this high-end operation. Most cavalrymen use the momentum of the warhorse's charge to slash from top to bottom. Unless they encounter skilled veterans, cavalrymen have a great inherent advantage over defending infantrymen. At the moment of contact between the two sides, 3 or 4 cavalrymen broke through the defense line. The cavalrymen who killed the Yellow Fang soldier were directly targeted by Dick because they were closest to him. Clang, clang, clang. Dick and the cavalrymen slashed each other 3 times in a short period of time. The two swords collided violently, creating some sparks, but they were not stained with each other's blood. Swordsmanship can't deceive people. After these 3 sword fights, both of them knew that the other party was definitely not an ordinary soldier. They no longer used the begin fierce slashing moves to kill the enemy, but became more cautious in breaking and testing, looking for the opponent's flaws to see who could be more skilled. RIP. During a sword blocking process, the cavalryman took advantage of Dick's reluctant blocking and slashed down with the long sword in his hand, cutting a bloody mark on his calf that could not be protected by the mail. This won't work. Dick discovered that the swordsmanship of the cavalryman on the opposite side was rapidly improving in the battle. Rich combat experience told him that if he continued to stalemate like this, he would surely die under the opponent's sword. With a change of mind, Dick suddenly stepped forward, holding the long sword tightly with both hands, and slashed the cavalry with the force of a mountain. He wanted to defeat the opponent with a sudden burst of all his strength. Clang, clang. The crisp sound of metal collisions continued to ring out, and the cavalry on the opposite side began to be caught off guard by Dick, and retreated repeatedly in embarrassment. Although the cavalry was very embarrassed, they also resisted Dick's fierce attack. After gradually adapting to the rhythm, the cavalry held the sword with his right hand and swung Dick's long sword, which was gradually exhausted, leaving him with a wide open chest. Taking this opportunity, the blood-stained longsword in the cavalry's hand drilled into Dick's throat like a venomous snake, ending the battle. Caca. Dick, who was coughing up blood, found before he died that he was too focused on the sword fight with the cavalry and did not realize that other battles had already ended. A dozen enemy cavalrymen were surrounding the two of them. Even if he could kill his opponent, he was doomed to die. Seeing that this rather difficult opponent was gradually losing his life, the cavalryman drew out his long sword and swung it lightly to the ground. The blood on the sword was immediately thrown to the ground, forming a blood mark like a crescent moon. Dick's body lost its support and fell to the ground with a bang. Taking off his helmet, Robb smelled the sweet and fishy smell in the air. This sweet and fishy smell is actually due to a large amount of blood, or the smell of divalent ions in the internal blood. But a large amount of blood or internal blood often represents death, so this can also be called the breath of death. The Stark family has always cultivated their sons with wolf nature. In the fused memory, the original Robb has long been accustomed to corpses and blood, and has ended many lives with his own hands. He has long been familiar with this smell. But the current Robb is somewhat unable to adapt to this smell. But he knows that this smell will always be with him in the future. Robb looked down at his hands and felt the power rising in his body. Thinking back to the long sword that had just ended the enemy's life, he couldn't help but feel a sense of control over all life. Is this the feeling of controlling power and authority in this world? Shaking his head, Robb forced down the distracting thoughts in his mind and looked around the battlefield full of corpses and debris. He announced loudly to the Winterfell cavalrymen who were watching him closely, "The murderers have all redeemed their sins in the 7 hells. Return to Winterfell, and each will be rewarded with 50 silver deer. The families of the dead will receive 3 times as much. Always be loyal to the Stark family. Long live Lord Robb." Robb's reward immediately aroused the enthusiasm of the Winterfell soldiers, and everyone cheered. His reward was not low. A table of fine food and wine consisting of lamb, duck, butter peas, oatmeal bread and 4 cups of ale, spending a silver deer, and getting back a handful of copper coins. In the original play, King Joffrey offered a reward of only 100 silver deer, which made people fearlessly attack the tall and warlike hounds. Robb, we killed a total of 16 enemies. 2 of our soldiers died on the spot, and another was seriously injured. I have sent him on his way. Theon approached Robb and reported the achievements and losses of this battle in a low voice. PS. The currency is simplified to gold dragons, silver deer, copper coins, and the exchange rate is 1:210:11,760. Chapter 6. The Spoils of War and Ramsay's Snow. Robb nodded and ordered him, Theon, you lead people to cut off the heads of these 16 enemies, tie them to the horses together with the bodies of the 3 soldiers who died, and we will take them back to Winterfell. Okay, I'll do it now. Theon agreed and immediately turned around to ask people to do it. Wait, Theon. Hearing Robb's call, Theon turned his head and looked at him with a puzzled look on his face. Thank you, Robb said to him softly with a smile. Hearing this, Theon raised the corners of his mouth, waved his hand casually, and turned around to do his work. Robb looked at Theon's back and thought about how to completely subdue him in the future. Theon is not a bad person by nature. He has certain military capabilities and can lead a team to conduct small-scale operations. Moreover, his combat effectiveness is also in the upper middle level in Westeros, and his archery is particularly outstanding. Over the years, he has grown up with Robb and others, and received the same education as Eddard, and actually has developed some family affection. Moreover, Theon has always been close to Robb, and has always regarded him as a brother. In the original drama, before Theon was bewitched by his biological father Balon and sister Yara to attack Winterfell, he had thought of writing a letter to remind Robb. But Theon was indecisive and his will was not strong enough. So he was easily influenced by others, and became a fence sitter. If Robb could really conquer him completely now, and make him serve wholeheartedly, he would definitely be a capable general in the future. Jon, go check the bags on the horses over there. Robb, who knew the personality characteristics of the people around him, gave Jon the task of cleaning up the spoils. Jon nodded expressionlessly, and walked towards the group of horses tied to the small trees in the col without saying a word. You are very good, Robb. You can make the correct tactical arrangements for the first time you lead the team and win with less losses. Captain Jory, wearing a blood-stained mail armor, praised Robb as soon as he walked up to him. This long-distance pursuit was completely commanded by Robb alone. In the first half of the night, Robb arranged the scout cavalry in front, and found Dick and others who were resting in the camp according to the traces. However, Robb and others were already exhausted at that time. Therefore, he did not attack rashly, but ate and rested until dawn, before launching a surprise attack. Of course, the elite cavalry of Winterfell usually eat a lot of fruits, meat, and animal offal. Therefore, they basically do not have the night blindness common among civilians in this era. Compared with the southern war horses, the more durable endurance of the northern war horses is also very important. Captain Jory, you are too kind. In fact, even if the 3 of us are not here, you can easily annihilate this group of enemies with your team. Facing this captain of the personal guard who has followed Eddard for nearly 20 years, Robb maintained a respectful and humble attitude. Haha, when your parents got married, I said in the bridal chamber, the son you two have, must be very remarkable. Haha. Listening to Jory talking about the past, Robb, who had nothing to do, smiled and responded on the surface, but his mind was recalling the scene of obtaining the blood contract point just now. When Robb killed Dick, in his field of vision, a red mist as thick as a thumb rose from Dick's body and sank into his body in an instant. At that time, he suddenly felt a constant flow of power in his body. Blood pact points +5. In fact, this battle gave Robb a total of 7 blood pact points. However, when he broke through the defensive formation and killed the first soldier, the battle was fierce and Robb had no time to check the prompt message that flashed in front of him. At present, his total blood pact points are 7 points. During the pursuit yesterday, the portable dry food he ate did not allow Robb to gain 1 blood pact point per day. He speculated that it might be because the portable dry food was too simple and did not contain rich nutrition. After a while, Theon and Jon completed their tasks one after another and came back to report to Robb. Jon speculated that Dick and others must have looted more than just Dunglin village, because he counted and found a total of 27 gold dragons, more than 1,000 silver deer and a large bag of copper coins. There were also 17 good northern war horses and 2 large bags of precious herbs and wild goods. Such a large amount of wealth cannot be collected by a Dunglin village. After resting for about 10 minutes, Robb gave an order, and the cavalrymen of Winterfell skillfully controlled the horses and spoils, and began to return. There was no forced march on the way back. First, the horses were already quite tired, and second, the extra horses and spoils were a burden. After about half a day, Robb and his party came to the intersection of the White Knife River and the Lin Li River. Theon, let everyone eat and rest, and wipe the blood off your body. Seeing that the view here was wide and there was a water source at the intersection, Robb, who was leading the way, ordered Theon beside him. Theon nodded, turned his horse back, and shouted loudly along the cavalry team to dismount and rest. Jon, take someone to the front to explore the situation, and I will send someone to take over later. After receiving Robb's order, Jon nodded, tilted his head towards a familiar cavalryman in the team, and the two rode to explore the front. This time, Robb led the troops independently. The military tactics that his father Eddard had always talked about gradually became practical in his mind. Robb did not let the cavalrymen dismount and rest and clean their bodies. Instead, they were rotated in batches to prevent possible cavalry raids. After Robb and others simply wiped off the coagulated blood on their bodies and ate dry food, Jon and the others rode back quickly. Robb, there is a group of cavalry ahead, carrying the Bolton family's flayed flag. As soon as he approached, Jon directly reported the situation. The Bolton family, have they attacked you? Hearing this, Robb touched the stubble on his chin, thought for a while and asked. No, they ride very slowly, it feels like we are going out for an outing. Okay, I know. Jon, you two take a rest, and the rest of you organize the team, and be ready to fight at any time. After Robb gave the order, the cavalrymen began to quickly organize their mail armor, then jumped on their horses to prepare for battle. Soon, the cavalry appeared in Robb's field of vision. After riding a certain distance, they stopped moving forward. One of the cavalrymen holding the flag of the Skinner approached Robb's cavalry. After a conversation, Robb learned that they were led by Ramsay Snow, the illegitimate son of Roose Bolton, and their purpose was to pursue the defecting soldiers who looted 2 villages. After learning Robb's identity, the cavalry saluted respectfully and rode back to report. A few minutes later, with a bright smile on his face, Ramsay, with black hair and black eyes, came to Robb with 2 followers and 2 hounds. Dear Lord Stark, Ramsay Snow from the Bolton family extends his heartfelt greetings to you. Ramsay, I think the defecting soldiers you are chasing should be them, right? Facing the characters he extremely hated in his heart, Robb smiled instead, and pointed to the heads on the horses behind him. Yes, that's them. They are so lucky to die in the hands of Lord Stark. Lucky? Yes, I really hope they will unfortunately fall into my hands. They massacred a village in our territory. I will now use these heads to report to my father. Take your people and return to your Bolton family. After a few simple conversations, looking at Ramsay with a smile on his face, but a dangerous light flashing in his eyes, Robb frowned and said, not wanting to continue to entangle. Yes, I will follow your orders. Please give my regards to Lord Eddard. Ramsay's smile paused when he heard this. Then he nodded and answered, and returned with his followers and the hound. Lord Ramsay, you don't have to be so respectful to this little Lord Stark, right? After all, our Bolton family is loyal to his father. After Ramsay and others turned around and left, a short, fat, and ugly follower beside him spoke. Erin, we are a group of hounds. We must be loyal to our masters. The eldest son of the Duke of the North. What an enviable identity. Ramsay smiled sinisterly, his eyes moving, and he said grimly, well, Dick is very lucky to die. I'm very unhappy. Now, let's find a place to have some fun and vent. Chapter 7 Changes in Bloodwind. Robb and his party first joined the Winterfell soldiers who stayed in Eastwood Village and buried the villagers. After waking up, Sam expressed his decision to join the Winterfell army and then followed Robb's team without saying a word. Then when they rushed back to Winterfell, it was almost sunset. When Robb brought Jon, Theon, and Jory to the council hall, Eddard and Maester Luwin and others were already waiting for them. It was near dusk, and the council hall was already dim. At this time, many candles had been lit early. This is the situation, Father. Robb narrated what happened in the past 2 days, and then stood quietly waiting for the most powerful man in the north to speak. Eddard clasped his hands under his chin, thought for a while and said, Mr. Lewin, send a raven to tell Rose Bolton about this and ask him to give me an explanation. Jory, have someone stick those heads at the intersection outside Winterfell, with their crimes written next to them, to show those who want to commit crimes what will happen to them. Robb, you will be in charge of the distribution of the spoils and the pensions for the fallen soldiers. Eddard finished his orders in one breath, and Robb and the other two immediately saluted and replied, Yes, father. Yes, sir. I'll do it right away. Looking at his eldest son who turned to leave, thinking of the bad news that Catelyn told him yesterday, Eddard gritted his gums and made a decision. He said, Robb, put on your training leather armor and come to the parade ground at dawn tomorrow morning. Yes, father. Robb, who was about to leave, turned around and agreed with some confusion and went to the armory with Jon and Theon to take off his armor and put away their weapons. Hey, Robb, I killed 2 enemies. Should I get more of the spoils? Theon casually threw the blood-stained mail and longsword aside and said to Robb with a smile, Jon will distribute the spoils tomorrow. If you want more, go find him. I'm going back to my room first. Robb was worried about Bloodwind, so he stopped Theon with one sentence, threw the weapons and mail aside, and left. The mail and weapons in the armory will be cleaned and maintained by special servants. Jon Snow. Watching Robb's back leaving the armory, Theon turned around and looked at Jon with a cold face and silence, and waved his hand. Forget it, just pretend I didn't say anything. When I have money, I will go to Rose to study body art. Jon completely ignored Theon. He sorted out his weapons and mail and looked at the direction where Robb left thoughtfully. Hey, little guy, did you miss me? As soon as he returned to his room, Robb held Bloodwind, who was sleeping in old clothes, in his arms and stroked its soft wolf hair. Woo. Bloodwind, who was awakened by Robb's rough method, protested pitifully with a low roar. Hey, have you grown up a little? Feeling the weight of Bloodwind, Robb held Bloodwind in front of his eyes and observed him. The blood contract points are indeed magical enough. The 1 point of constitution added 2 days ago seems to have obvious effect now. Looking at Bloodwind who has obviously grown a circle, Robb's thoughts moved, and the familiar blood mist rose up and sank into Bloodwind's body. Constitution +1. After the blood word prompts passed by 3 times in a row, no matter how Robb thought about adding constitution, there was no response. He pondered for a while, and the idea flashed through his mind, and he tried to add points again. Speed +1, strength +1, there is no problem with adding points to the other 2 items of Bloodwind. Reality is indeed different from games. You can't add all points to one attribute. After the experiment, Robb gained some more knowledge about the Goldfinger, and he did not continue to add points. Name, Bloodwind. Contractor, Robb Stark. Constitution. 5. Speed. 3. Strength. 2. Clan, Psychic direwolf. 6. Blood contract points. 2. After adding points this time, Robb did not feel tired. I wonder if it was because there were still blood contract points left. Robb hugged Bloodwind for a while and then put it back into the old clothes nest. Bloodwind, finally freed, yawned and closed his eyes to sleep. At dinner time, Eddard did not appear in the banquet hall, and Catelyn ate the food silently with a gloomy face. Since she did not take the initiative to speak, Robb and others did not want to touch this bad luck. During the whole dinner process, Theon, who was the atmosphere group, was telling about how he bravely killed the enemy. Seeing Arya and Brandon rushing to ask Theon all kinds of strange questions, asking him speechless, Robb could not help but smile knowingly. But he accidentally saw Jon observing him. Jon should have discovered that my personality and way of doing things are different from before. This kid knows nothing about love, but he has a keen sense of smell in other aspects. Robb's face remained unchanged, and he stopped paying attention to this matter. Because no matter how Jon observed, he could not conclude that he was a time traveler. Robb, your father's adoptive father, the King's Hand, Lord Arryn, died of fever. His Majesty, with all the royal family, has set off to Winterfell. Catelyn suddenly spoke, and the atmosphere at the table changed instantly. Everyone listened to her story quietly. I still remember your wrinkled appearance when you were born in Reveron, and in the blink of an eye you have grown up. You must be ready. Be ready to be a competent lord, and be ready to protect your brothers and sisters. Mother, I promise to be ready. Seeing Catelyn's sad face, Robb immediately comforted her. You guys eat. I'll go back to my room first. Looking at the serious expression of her eldest son, Catelyn left a word and turned to leave the banquet hall. The king is coming to Winterfell. Will the Kingslayer come? Will the little devil come? I heard from others that the prince is very handsome. I wonder if it's true as the rumors say. HMPH. I wonder if those weak southerners will be unbearable when they come to the north. But southern girls should be more charming than northern girls. After Catelyn left, the banquet hall suddenly became noisy. Robb looked at his brothers and sisters who had no idea how tragic the future would be, shook his head, and continued to eat. The dinner consisting of meat, fruits and vegetables was indeed more nutritious than dry food. After eating about 1.5 servings, Robb obtained 1 blood contract point. Northwest of the Dreadfort, there is a plain area between the Long Lake and the bare lonely mountain. A team of hundreds of cavalrymen was slowly moving forward in a sweeping manner. The Earl of the Dreadfort, Robb Bolton, was listening to the soldiers' report on the Raven News. Okay, I got it. How are the other cavalry teams doing? Robb Bolton, a man of medium build, pale complexion and gentle appearance, asked softly after hearing the news. They have all arrived at the designated location, and will be able to capture them at noon tomorrow. Although this group of wildlings is difficult to deal with, hundreds of cavalrymen will surely be able to destroy them all by surrounding and charging. The soldier who reported the news answered immediately. Where is Ramsay? Since the group of defecting soldiers were wiped out by the Stark family, why hasn't he returned yet? Lord Ramsay hasn't sent back any news yet. Well, let the cavalry team in the southwest withdraw, and the other teams continue to surround them. Southwest. That's the direction of the Stark family. As you command. After Rose gave the order, he looked at the southwest with cold eyes, and whispered to himself, I'll let the explanation come to you automatically, Lord Eddard. Chapter 8 Wolfpack Ritual. At dawn the next day, Robb had already eaten a rich breakfast, and walked from the main castle to the parade ground in neat clothes. As soon as he stepped into the stone gate of the parade ground, he saw a group of soldiers in standard leather armor standing still on the parade ground full of arrow slits and weapon racks, silently watching him. His father Eddard and Sir Roderick, who was also fully armed, were waiting for him on the wooden platform in front of the parade ground. Seeing this formation, Robb quickened his pace and stood under the platform in 2 or 3 steps. These warriors are the descendants of many of my vassals in the north. From today on, you will live, train and fight with them. As soon as Robb stood still, Eddard introduced him to him with a solemn expression and a serious tone. Hearing this, Robb quickly scanned the queue and found that most of them were indeed young faces. Eddard pointed his right finger at Robb and continued to speak to the warriors. Robb Stark, the next Warden of the North, the Lord of Winterfell. You were born in the North and will be buried in the North. From today on, he will entrust his life to you and will also bring you honor and glory. All of you will be brothers worth talking to with open hearts, and comrades worth entrusting to fight behind your back. Lone wolves die, and packs of wolves live. You are his wolf pack. Serve Lord Stark until death. As Eddard finished speaking, a shout suddenly came from the soldiers, and then the soldiers on the parade ground began to respond. Serve Lord Robb until death. 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 Listening to the shouts that gradually came in unison, Robb felt his blood boiling, and his emotions were in a very excited state. Westeros is a traditional eldest son inheritance system, but Eddard can also designate other heirs such as Brandon and Rickon to inherit the Lord's title. And Eddard's behavior today is called the Wolf Pack Ceremony, which is equivalent to clearly designating Robb as the heir to the North. Even if Robb is incompetent, dissolute, and absurd in the future, as long as he does not commit unforgivable crimes such as patricide and regicide, no one can shake his right of succession. The Wolf King should have his own wolf pack. Wolf Pack Ceremony is an unwritten tradition of the Stark family. It is a personal guard formed by the current lord for the next lord. Of course, since the Mad King burned Eddard's father and brother to death without any warning, when Eddard was 18 years old. He lived in the Eyrie at the time and naturally obtained the right of succession, but did not experience this traditional ceremony. but he adhered to tradition and had already begun to look for suitable vassal heirs to prepare for the ceremony for Robb, but for some other reasons, he put the plan in advance. The next thing is up to you, Sir Rodrik. Eddard looked at the emotional soldiers on the parade ground, tilted his head to nod at Rodrik, and turned to leave. When the scene gradually calmed down, Rodrik would perform his duties as a coach. At his signal, a total of 30 soldiers on the parade ground began to fight against each other. This is a simulated combat training, so they all wear leather armor and fight with blunt swords. Although blunt swords cannot cut through leather armor, being hit by a powerful swing is absolutely painful. Robb, who is alone, naturally faces Rodrik, who has rich combat experience. After a sword fight, Rodrik praised Robb with great satisfaction, thinking that he had done a good job. But Robb didn't care about it at all, and was not very satisfied with himself. In terms of combat, Robb can be said to be quite versatile. He is very good at tactics, swordsmanship, archery, riding, and close combat. He is born with talent in this area, but it is because of the pursuit of omnipotence and too wide range of knowledge that he cannot reach the pinnacle in a certain aspect. For example, the Kingslayer Jaime Lannister is completely bad in other aspects, but when he holds the sword with both hands, he can be regarded as the top class of swordsmanship in Westeros. Ed's personal guard captain, Jory Castle. Before, he followed Robb to chase the defecting soldiers of the Bolton family. At that time, Robb was concentrating on fighting, and had no time to care about other things. But according to Theon's casual chat, Jory rode his horse into the defensive formation of the defecting soldiers, and killed several soldiers like cutting melons and vegetables. But such a warrior was easily killed by Jaime Lannister in King's Landing a few months later, after killing several Lannister soldiers. Although Jaime was a little restful, he was able to kill Jory with one blow, more because he was too strong. After Rodrik instructed other warriors, Robb conducted daily routine sword training alone. After completing routine training, he felt that his swordsmanship had reached a bottleneck. Ordinary training can only consolidate the foundation, and it is difficult to make breakthrough progress. It was a real fight with the captain of the defecting soldiers that made his swordsmanship mature from immature and had a great growth. However, there are too few suitable opponents like this. Since the sword training had little effect, Robb simply rested on the spot and began to observe these personal guards who could be trusted with his back. However, even if they were loyal warriors selected by Eddard, Robb would not trust his back so easily. In the world of Game of Thrones, betrayal is commonplace, and he will only feel at ease with those who are personally recognized by Robb. At first glance, the most eye-catching is a female warrior who is at least 6 feet tall, about 183 centimeters. As a female warrior, her style is completely different from that of Brienne of Tarth, who is stronger and more burly than men. She is tall and slender, and her steps are swift and elegant in the sword fight with her opponent, as if she is performing a sword dance. This fighting style is not like the sword fighting of Westeros at all, but a bit like the water dance of Bravos. Another person who stands out from the crowd is a big man with a full beard and a height of about 7.5 feet, about 228 centimeters. He was a complete warrior of Westeros. The standard blunt sword seemed a little small in his hands. Under his two-handed sword slashing attack, his opponent was beaten to the point where he could only parry. However, it can be seen that the descendants of the northern vassal have good fighting ability. Although this warrior was a little embarrassed in blocking left and right, he completely blocked the fierce attack of the big man. After he adapted, he could occasionally attack back with a sword, slowly disrupting the rhythm of the big man's attack. Robb knew in his heart that, as long as he persisted, he would be the winner in the end. The result was not beyond his expectations. The big man could not attack for a long time, and finally his attack rhythm was completely messed up. He was hit on the left waist by the opponent's sword. The pain distorted his face, but he clenched his teeth and insisted on not crying out. Unlike the usual basic training, this training lasted for a long time. Until near noon, when Sir Rodrik loudly announced a break, all the soldiers who had been training in the drill ground for a morning breathed a sigh of relief. They gathered around Robb, either to express their loyalty or to get closer. Robb did not disappoint them. He replied, talked, and greeted them one by one with a smile on his face. He also learned that the female warrior was called Daisy Mormont, a descendant of the Mormont family of Bear Island. The big man was Little Janumber, a descendant of the Umber family, and his opponent was called Owen Nor, a descendant of the Nor clan of the mountains. Robb had never heard of the names of others except Little Janumber, who was somewhat familiar with him. P.S. This is an original Wolfpack ritual. If you don't like it, please don't criticize me. I paid attention to the data today and found that there are more than 20 collections in total, and 19 readers have read it to the latest. Thank you for your support. It is very important to read new books now. Please continue to support this book. Chapter 9 Bloodwind appears. Little Janumber, nicknamed Little Jan, is the son of Big Jan and the heir of Last Hearth. In the original play, he finally abandoned the Stark family and surrendered to Ramsay with Rickon and the heads of Shaggy Dog. In the Battle of the Bastards, he died at the mouth of the Wildling Torment. Little Jan is actually quite wronged. The warriors of the Umber family are known in the north for their bravery, loyalty, and fearlessness. Big Jan had 2 fingers bitten off by Grey Wind, but he admired Robb's bravery and remained loyal to him. He finally died at the Red Wedding. Little Jan, who escaped by chance, has been holding on in Last Hearth and has not surrendered to the Bolton family until Jon Snow led all the wildlings across the wall. As the Shield of the North, Last Hearth has always been the first fortress against the wildlings who crossed the wall. After thousands of years of fighting, there is a deep hatred between them and the wildlings. So Little Jan's final rebellion is completely understandable. Now Robb would never let such loyal warriors betray him again, but he greeted them all equally and stopped the overly enthusiastic contact. Some people need to use diplomacy to get along with others, but some people need to show strength. After greeting all the warriors, Robb coughed and shouted loudly, "Brothers, I know you are all warriors loyal to the Stark family, but I have never met most of you, and you must be observing what kind of person I am. No matter how many words I say, it will be pale. Now I stand here and compete with you in swordsmanship in turn. Whoever can knock me down will get a bonus of 100 silver deer. Lord Robb is so generous. Woohoo, I'll do it. As soon as Robb finished speaking, the warriors who were originally a little tired suddenly felt refreshed. These descendants of the northern vassal had little pocket money, and they usually spent lavishly. The bonus of 100 silver deer was already a lot. Immediately, a warrior closest to Robb asked to compete. Clang, clang. The sound of blunt swords colliding continued on the parade ground. Although Robb took time to rest and observe the warriors during training, he saved a lot of energy. But after all, his physical strength was not unlimited. After defeating 6 warriors in a row, he was knocked to the ground by the female warrior Daisy. Oh, Daisy, Daisy. Seeing Robb fall to the ground, all the warriors watching shouted Daisy's name excitedly. As one of the few female warriors in Westeros, Daisy, who had never felt such treatment, raised her blunt sword with a flushed face, as if she had won the whole world. Bah, everyone is great. The prize money belongs to Daisy. She will treat us tonight at the Smokewood Tavern in the Winter Market. Hearing the cheers in his ears, Robb stood up and spit out a mouthful of mud in his mouth, laughing without caring about his image, pointing his finger at Daisy and announcing loudly, "Long live Daisy, long live Lord Robb. Haha, I'm going to drink up all the beer in the Smokewood Tavern." Today's parade ground was like a vegetable market, making all kinds of noises. A certain adult who was secretly observing nodded with satisfaction when he saw Robb blend in very quickly. After dealing with the spoils and pensions, Robb's days were very regular and fulfilling. In addition to taking care of Bloodwind and routine training every day, he would drink and chat with the warriors. As the intimacy with the guards deepened, Robb now added a squad combat training in addition to the training arranged by Sir Roderick. The warriors of Westeros had no problem charging in formation, but after the 2 armies fought, it basically became an indiscriminate melee with no coordination. Therefore, Robb divided the 31 warriors into 6 teams. Under his secret operation, each team fought and exchanged ideas, and the strongest among them served as the captain. Daisy Mormont, Little Janumber, and Owen Norrie were elected in their respective teams without any surprise. The other 3 teams were elected by Torrhenka Stark, Eddard Stark, and Theon Greyjoy. Yes, the reason why it is 31 is that, after talking with Theon, Robb personally obtained Eddard's consent and added him to the guard. Torhan and Eddard are Robb's cousins, descendants of the Stark family, and their combat effectiveness is also quite good. As for the blood contract points, I don't know if it is because of the high intensity training every day, which consumes a lot of physical energy. Robb, whose appetite increased greatly this week, only gained a mere 3 points by eating dry food. But after repeated tests this week, Robb initially summarized 2 rules for adding points. First, if all the blood contract points are added at once, the body will be like being hollowed out, and a negative state of weakness and fatigue will appear. Second, the highest data of Bloodwind's 3 measurements cannot exceed 3 times the lowest data. Bloodwind's current data, speed has been added to 4, strength has been added to 3, and constitution has been added to 7 points, with 1 blood contract point remaining as a minimum. The 7-point constitution makes Bloodwind like a balloon, and Robb can see it grow with his naked eyes every day. Today, Bloodwind has grown from the size of a little teddy bear to the size of an adult Alaskan, standing at about 70 centimeters tall, and weighing nearly 80 kilograms. In the past 10 days, the other 5 direwolves have also grown at an unusual rate, growing to the size of a 5 or 6 month old puppy, which is completely incomparable to Bloodwind. Of course, except for the male servant who is responsible for carrying meat every day, no one else knows that Bloodwind has grown to this size. Unlike his brothers and sisters who like to show off with direwolves, Robb's Bloodwind has been in his bedroom during this period, and has never gone out. Except for eating, it spends most of its time sleeping every day. This may be the negative impact of rapid growth. Squeak. The bedroom door was opened, and Bloodwind, who was lying beside the solid wood bed, immediately raised his head to observe the situation. Bloodwind. The door was fully opened, and Robb, wearing standard male armor, appeared at the door. He called softly, and Bloodwind immediately showed a happy mood, and quickly got up, exerted force with his wolf claws, and lightly jumped over the solid wood bed, and came to his side. Robb knelt on one knee, holding Bloodwind's fluffy head with both hands, and scratched his cheek for a while. Bloodwind closed his eyes comfortably, looking like a silly dog. Okay, Bloodwind, let's go. I'll take you out to see the outside world today. Thinking of the task assigned by his father Ed, Robb stopped tickling, called Bloodwind and walked out of the bedroom. In the corridor of the main castle, the servants who saw Robb and Bloodwind subconsciously showed a scared expression and dodged to the side. As an extraordinary creature, Bloodwind looked like a silly dog in front of Robb. But in front of strangers, he had cold eyes and fangs, looking like a ferocious predator. At the door of the main castle leading to the parade ground, Ed and his wife, Robb's brothers and sisters were waiting for him with their own direwolves. When they saw Bloodwind, who had already taken on the form of a beast in just 10 days, their faces showed disbelief. When Bloodwind saw the other direwolves in his pack, he suddenly stretched his neck and looked up to the sky and let out a long wolf howl. A woo. Updated the second chapter in advance, because the station is sending a short message today. Now we will start the signing process. You can invest and get some benefits. Finally, thank you all for your support. Chapter 10 Savages. At the gate of the main castle of Winterfell, Bloodwind's grey fur stood up, his ears were straight open, his fluffy tail was raised high, and he howled with a majestic posture. The other 5 direwolves, that looked like puppies, lay on all fours. Their fur was flat on their bodies, their ears and tails were drooping low, showing their obedience. Robb, is this your Bloodwind? Eddard, who always kept his emotions to himself, was really shocked by Bloodwind's growth rate this time. Yes, father. It can eat and sleep, and grows faster. Robb nodded to confirm, then hesitated and said what he had prepared. Eddard nodded, and used his eyes to stop Catelyn, who wanted to ask questions, and other children who wanted to pester Robb, and said, go. Robb, we'll wait for you to come back. Yes. Father, mother, I'll take my leave first. Seeing that Eddard really didn't ask any more questions, Robb greeted his parents, and then took the gradually calmed Bloodwind to the parade ground. Well, Robb is a glutton, and his Bloodwind is also a glutton. Nymeria, you should also eat more, and grow up quickly. Puff, Arya, I'm afraid it will be the same as you, no matter how much it eats. Watching Robb walk away with the majestic Bloodwind, Arya squatted down, and picked up her direwolf, muttering, When Sansa heard her words, she covered her mouth and laughed, teasing her naughty sister. Arya rolled her eyes at her and returned to the main castle alone with Nymeria in her arms. Jon, what I said can only fool Arya and Rickon. Why can Bloodwind grow so fast? Brandon asked, pulling Jon's sleeve. Jon's handsome face was full of thought. He looked at Brandon who was asking him, smiled and shook his head, indicating that he didn't know how to answer. Catelyn heard the words of her children behind her. She put her hand on Eddard's shoulder and whispered, Ned, Robb said such words that even children would not believe. Is he telling us that he has his own secrets? Kate, our son has grown up. Eddard did not answer his wife's question. He covered the white little hand on his shoulder with his rough big hand and said a meaningful word with a smile on his mouth. When Robb came to the parade ground, all the guards were wearing armor of their own family style and waiting beside their horses. They were only slightly surprised to see the majestic Bloodwind because they did not know its extraordinary growth speed. Theon was leading 2 horses. When he saw Robb, he stepped forward and handed him the reins of one of the horses, exclaiming in disbelief, Robb, is this wolf Bloodwind? The little wolf cub that was rescued a few days ago. 10 days ago, yes, it is Bloodwind. Robb took the reins of the warhorse, whispered to Theon, and then turned to the guards and said loudly, you should all understand this mission. Now get on the horses and set off. Yes, Lord Robb. With a neat answer, 32 people including Robb stepped on the horses in unison, with neat and handsome movements. After Robb's group of knights filed out of the north gate of Winterfell, they accelerated towards the long lake in the northeast, and Bloodwind ran beside Robb. Bloodwind, who had been staying in the bedroom for a while, was finally able to run as much as he wanted, and began to release his wild instincts. At the junction of the southwest side of the Long Lake and the Wolf Forest, Jory and more than 190 soldiers from Winterfell were stationed in a temporary camp. After riding for half a day, Robb and his party arrived at this temporary camp. A few days ago, the Bolton family sent a raven saying that a group of 40 or 50 wildlings, by some unknown means, bypassed Castle Black and Last Hearth, and attacked the guard posts in their territory and the nearby villages. Lord Robbos, the Earl of the Dreadfort, personally led hundreds of cavalry to besiege them, but they broke through in advance and fled to our Stark family's territory. By the way, the deserting soldier we killed before was from that guard post. After Robb and Jory met and exchanged greetings, he couldn't wait to introduce the situation. Lord Eddard ordered me to bring 200 cavalry to wipe them out, but these wildlings were very cunning. After noticing us, they ran to places that were not conducive to the movement of horses. After several days of encirclement and hunting, they have been trapped in this woods, but the woods are their territory. I took my men in and didn't even see them, and I lost several people. After reporting to Lord Eddard, he asked me to set up camp and wait for your support. Captain Jory, no wonder I haven't seen you for a while. You were fighting against the wildlings. Well, I have a general idea of the situation, and from now on, I will take over this mission. Of course. Robb took control while chatting with Jory. He looked at the lush green forest and murmured, but this time you have to be auxiliary. In a flat green area somewhere in the Wolf Forest, in a camp built with simple tents, a group of wildlings wrapped in ragged furs and with murderous faces sat in a circle, discussing something. If you ask me, after dark today, we should just rush into their camp and kill them. Without their war horses and armor, those southerners are nothing but idiots. Yes. We haven't had a good sleep or good food since we were chased by these southerners on horseback. Instead of this, we might as well take the initiative to attack. Yes, those southerners were too easy to kill before. Don't look down on the southerners. Although most of them are idiots, there are also many powerful ones. Aren't those crows also southerners without armor? A pretty female savage with messy brown hair wiped her homemade spear while reminding the savages who were a little too proud of themselves. When they heard her speak, the savages all quieted down and turned to look at her. From this action, it can be vaguely seen that this group of savages is led by her. The savages all believe in strength and pay attention to the rule of the jungle. They can agree that this female savage is the leader because she has led them to escape death many times. Osha, what do you think we should do? If we just wait, there will be more and more southerners outside, not to mention the food problem. One of the male savages, holding a sharp axe and with a messy beard covering most of his face, asked. Osha smiled and answered confidently, no matter how many southerners there are, it doesn't matter. The forest is our world. If they dare to come here to fight us, they are looking for death. If we can't win, we will flee to the depths of the forest. No matter how bad the environment is, can it be as bad as the ghost forest? That's what you say, but we climbed over the Great Wall at the risk of our lives, because we want to live a good life. Is hiding in the forest all the time a good life? Yes. We don't want to hide forever. The words of a savage resonated with his companions around him, and they began to talk about it again. We won't be trapped for long. As you know, the king in the north has begun to gather an army. It won't be long before all these southerners will go to help the crows. Then our good days will come. All the villages of these southerners will be like pieces of delicious fat meat for us to eat at will. Osha said with a gleam in her eyes and a longing look on her face. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 11, Crusade. Click, click. Robb's boots made a small crisp sound as they stepped on the dry grass. He was leading Theon's team through a forest full of giant trees. These lush trees blocked the sunlight, and occasionally a beam of light passed through the leaves and surrounded them, providing some light for the surroundings. Not far from Robb and his team, behind a tree covered with vines, a rusty iron arrow slowly stretched out from the vines, like a poisonous snake, staring at Robb and his team. Hidden in the vines was a wild archer covered with green leaves. The wild archer looked at this team of southerners wearing various armors, and was trying to decide who was the leader. At this distance, he had to flee immediately after shooting an arrow, otherwise he would be caught up by them. Woo. The wild archer, who was pulling the bow hard, suddenly heard a threatening roar of a beast beside him. When he turned his head stiff with shock, and looked in the direction of the roar, a grey figure had already pounced in front of him. Ah. Ah. Hearing the scream, Robb's mouth curled up a smile. The fish finally took the bait. Bloodwind, leave him alive. Robb shouted in the direction of the scream, and winked at Theon. Theon nodded, and with a team member behind him, they dragged back a wild man who had lost a hand in a few minutes. Woo. Bloodwind, with blood all over his face, holding a bloody paw in his mouth, returned with them. When he saw Robb, he rushed to his side to ask for credit, wanting to share the spoils with Robb. Well, Bloodwind, thank you, I don't want to eat. You can eat your snacks by yourself over there. Robb touched Bloodwind's bloody head without disdain, sent it aside, and turned to the screaming wildling and said, stop screaming. Either tell me the location of your camp, or let my direwolf digest you bit by bit. Facts have proved that it is impossible for every wildling to be as strong-willed as their king, who would rather be burned to death than surrender. After obtaining the direction of the wildling camp, Robb immediately led Theon's team to join the guards who followed closely behind. Haven't you come back yet? Osha, who placed her homemade spear across her knees, kept shaking her right foot in annoyance. Well, Iron Fang and Broken Bones haven't come back yet. According to the usual time, at least one of them will come back to report the situation. A wildling next to Osha shook his head and said, something is wrong. Everyone, take your things. We are moving to the depths of the forest now. Hearing this, Osha stood up and shouted to the wildlings lying in all directions. Just because the two scouts didn't come back, you're just going to give up here? If those southerners dare to come in, I'll... Whoosh. The bearded wildling warrior with a sharp axe stood up and was talking loudly to Osha when an arrow pierced his right eye, shutting him up forever. The southerners are coming. Take up your weapons to defend against them. Break the heads of these damn southerners. Kill. The wildlings in the camp were stunned at first, then they roared angrily, picked up their weapons, and rushed towards the attackers. As soon as Osha was attacked, she hid behind a tent and observed the attackers. When she saw that it was a group of southerners in armor, she quietly retreated behind them without hesitation. Everyone, organize into a spear formation in small teams, with the captain as the spear tip, and charge. Looking at the wildlings charging in a disorderly but powerful manner, Robb immediately gave orders loudly. 32 guards, including Robb, formed a spear formation in a short time and charged towards the wildlings head on. The two sides were not far apart, and they came into contact in an instant. Clang. The Theon team led by Robb was at the front, and it was natural that they would first encounter the wildlings who were at the front. He chopped the wildling's neck with a blown faucet, and the opponent's axe also hit his mail armor hard. Protected by the high-quality standard mail armor of Winterfell, the wildling's inferior axe did not hurt Robb, but the shock of power made him uncomfortable. At this time, a red mist rose from the wildling, who was lying on the ground, and sank into his body. Roar. Crack. When a wildling took advantage of Robb's axe shock and wanted to attack him, Bloodwind, who was following closely beside him, suddenly jumped up, and the wolf mouth full of sharp fangs accurately bit his neck bone. Kill. After the red mist entered his body, Robb felt the strange feeling in his body disappear instantly, and at the same time, the sense of power continued to surge. With Bloodwind's help, Robb began to get excited, as if possessed by the god of war, and just kept slashing forward. Although he was excited, his reason was still there. The bloody longsword in Robb's hand only used slashing moves, not stabbing moves. You know, in this kind of charge, if you use all your strength to stab the longsword into the enemy's body, you will use the same strength to pull it out. Not to mention the consumption of physical strength, the delay alone is enough for the enemy's comrades to kill him without a weapon. Therefore, the wildling warriors standing in front of Robb had no chance to make a second move, because the enemies he could kill instantly must have been lying on the ground, and those who could not be killed in one blow would be taken over by Bloodwind, Theon behind him and other teammates. The performance of the Sharp Knife team led by Robb was seen by the other 5 team captains. Their recognition of Robb deepened again, and they fought for him even more desperately. Heroism prevailed on the battlefield of Westeros. A brave and fearless commander who was recognized by his subordinates and charged forward could not only increase morale by +1. Instead, his soldiers would fight to the death before he died or surrendered, and there would be no automatic defeat due to losses. In the original drama Battle of the Bastards, Jon's side was surrounded by many enemies, but as long as he was alive, no one would surrender. The joint army of the Lion House and the Tully House, led by Jaime, was forced to fight against the Stone with an Egg, after encountering a surprise attack by a dragon and Dothraki cavalry. Finally, after Jaime fell into the river and disappeared, the army, which was mostly dead and wounded, surrendered. Let's get back to the point. At this time, the two sides fighting in the Wolf Forest, one side had excellent weapons and armor, and a neat and tight formation, while the other side had no protective gear, relatively inferior weapons, and only relied on bravery, without any formation. Therefore, from the top of the Wolf Forest, the team led by Robb was like 5 sharp knives, stabbing straight into a cream cake. When the sharp knives turned from stabbing to chopping, they instantly cut the cake into pieces. Plop. Robb, whose face was completely invisible, beheaded the opponent in front of him with a sword. When he was about to meet the next enemy, he found himself standing in the empty enemy camp, and Bloodwind was still following him closely. However, Bloodwind was also covered in blood, and he really lived up to his name. Robb turned his head and looked back. The ground behind him was covered with wildling corpses, and the blood dyed the entire green grass red. On the battlefield, some wildlings were still fighting with the guards, but the next moment they were hacked to death by other members who had freed their hands. The more eye-catching Little Jon was covered in blood, holding a wildling head in each hand, and roared "Ah, ah" to the sky. Robb took a deep breath of the fishy and sweet air, and began to calm his restless and excited emotions. A large number of blood points were obtained, and the red mist merged into his body, making Robb feel that he was in control of the power, and that all living beings were ants. Robb, we killed 48 enemies, 6 of our brothers were slightly injured, and no one died. Theon, whose face was covered with blood, and looked a little unrecognizable, completely adapted to his position. As soon as the battle was over, he automatically counted the casualties. Theon, thank you for your hard work. Robb suppressed his restlessness, pulled a smile from the corner of his mouth, and nodded to Theon. Woo. Shusho. Bloodwind beside Robb suddenly growled at the bushes behind him, sending a warning signal to him at the same time. The bushes were cut off by a sword, and Jory, who followed Robb's order and led the Winterfell soldiers to surround the camp in advance to prevent any fish from slipping through the net, came out with a female wildling. Chapter 12. Rising Fame. Outside Winterfell, Winter Market, Yanche Tavern. Yanche Tavern is the largest tavern in Winter Market. In addition to providing drinks and food, it also provides accommodation and entertainment services. Of course, some people will also exchange intelligence and inquire about various news here, or conduct some private business transactions. La la. Dee da da. At this moment, in Yanche Tavern, the unruly bards are playing and singing the cheerful Westeros classic song The Bear and the Beautiful Girl. Winterfell civilians with some spare money, merchants who want to make a lot of money, mercenaries looking for work and other classes gather here, drinking and chatting enthusiastically. Do you know? Lord Robb of the Stark family defeated the enemy with fewer troops and killed dozens of wild men who fled to the north. When they were full and drunk, a fat man with a plump figure and hazy eyes showed off his topic of conversation. Hickey, this, who doesn't know this? Anyone who is not blind can see the pile of wild heads at the intersection. A middle-aged man dressed as a businessman at the same table burped and laughed at his companion's outdated topic. Then do you know the direwolf accompanying him? When Lord Robb and his family left the city that day, I saw a direwolf that was both majestic and scary. Well, the emblem of the Stark family happens to be the direwolf. Do you think there are some unknown secrets in this? Ahem. Listening to the discussions of his drinking companions, the drunk fat man coughed and whispered mysteriously, I'll tell you secretly, the direwolf was only a dozen days old, and it was still a little wolf cub. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. I saw it with my own eyes. It was an adult direwolf. Fat Sonny, you are already drunk. As soon as Fat Sonny finished speaking, the person who started to say that he had seen a direwolf immediately refuted. Really, there are a total of 6 little wolf cubs in the Stark family. As for Lord Robb's wolf, its growth rate is beyond imagination. Seeing that everyone agreed with what that man said, Fat Sonny became a little anxious and his voice became much higher. My brother-in-law is a senior official in the main castle. He told me all this. No matter what you say, I won't believe it. How can what I saw with my own eyes be false? That's right, many people have seen that dire wolf. It's an adult wolf. Maybe the other cubs are its children. Yeah. No one will believe that it can become an adult wolf in just a dozen days. Oh. Just forget it. If you don't believe it, I'm too lazy to pay attention to you. Seeing that everyone was making a fuss and didn't believe him, Fat Sonny stopped talking dejectedly and began to drink alone. However, I heard that Lord Eddard has designated Lord Robb as his successor. I've heard that too. Some people also say that Lord Robb is a young wolf blessed by the old gods with both wisdom and bravery. Yes, he chased the defecting soldiers of the Bolton family overnight, defeated the enemy with fewer troops, and defeated dozens of fierce wildlings with 0 casualties. He is completely worthy of the title of young wolf. Also, the group of wolf guards he formed are all brave and good at fighting and can beat 10 people alone. Yes, I heard. Although Fat Sonny didn't say anything else, the topic he raised completely ignited the cigarette tavern, and everyone began to discuss the gossip they knew. The long peaceful north had no wars, and battles involving more than 10 people would be talked about over and over again, not to mention battles involving hundreds of people. You know, some small noble families can only support 100 full-time elite warriors at most, and the rest are half farmers and half soldiers. Therefore, Robb's deeds have been talked about and spread over and over again by the civilians near Winterfell. Creak. The door of the tavern was pushed open, and a young man with brown hair, fair skin and a handsome face, holding a long sword at his waist, wearing leather armor with the family emblem of the dire wolf, walked in with several young soldiers, dressed in the same way. It's Lord Theon, one of the 6 captains of the Wolf Guard, the adopted son of Lord Eddard, and the deputy of Lord Robb. TSK, so impressive. I also want to join the Wolf Guard. Do they accept mercenaries? Theon listened to the discussions in the tavern. He couldn't help but stop and listen, with a slight smile on his face, and his vanity was greatly satisfied. Bang. Looking at him standing still, a member of the team behind him lightly hit his back shoulder. Theon reacted immediately, thinking of his mission, and his eyes immediately moved around, looking for a target. His eyes suddenly lit up, and he led people to quickly come to Fat Sonny, who was drinking alone. "You are Sonny, right? Lord Robb invites you." Hiccup. "Lord Robb invites me?" Fat Sonny, who was a little drunk, looked up at Theon, who was fully armed. He suddenly remembered that he had just used his brother-in-law's secret as a topic of conversation, and he was sobered up immediately. "Help our drunk Sonny." Theon turned his head and tilted his head to the team members behind him. The team members behind him stepped forward to hold Fat Sonny and dragged him out of the tavern. Crash. Fat Sonny certainly didn't want to go. While struggling, he knocked over the wine glasses and plates on the table. The drinkers around didn't want to cause trouble, so they quickly retreated to a distance to watch the excitement. Boom. Theon frowned and knocked the struggling Fat Sonny unconscious with a punch. The team members dragged him out of the tavern. Glancing around the quiet tavern, he took out a small bag from his arms and threw it to a waitress wearing a servant's apron beside him. He patted her big butt and said loudly, "This round of drinks is on Lord Robb's treat. Woohoo. Long live the young wolf. Generous Lord Robb. Little Lucy, bring me a glass of golden wine from the arbor." "Sorry, no." "Oh, then a glass of fine ale." After Theon left the Smokywood Tavern, the bards in the tavern continued to play music, intertwining with all kinds of chaotic and noisy sounds. Everyone in the tavern seemed to have forgotten about Fat Sonny and continued to eat, drink and have fun. Of course, some people hidden in the crowd would not forget and quietly left the tavern. "So, my stable master is an eyeliner of other forces?" In the study room of Winterfell, Eddard looked into his son's eyes, put his right index and middle fingers together, rubbed his right temple, and frowned and said, "Yes, father. Although I don't know which force it belongs to, it has indeed been reporting our every move to the outside world." Robb nodded in confirmation and continued, "Father, I want to set up my own intelligence agency. At present, all our information is passed on to us by outsiders, and we can't get real and effective information in time. Where is the stable master now?" Eddard did not respond to Robb's suggestion, but continued to ask. "He died. He didn't survive the interrogation. You were a little reckless this time, Robb. Although I know he is definitely not Robert's man, have you ever thought that he is a spy for the royal family?" "Father, our family has been loyally guarding the north for a long time. When eliminating an unknown spy, do we have to worry about whether he is a royal spy? If the royal family wants to massacre our family, can we only accept death?" Bang. Hearing Robb's words, Eddard was furious and slammed the table and scolded, "Don't let me hear such words again. The Stark family has declared their allegiance to the royal family, so they must abide by this oath. Keeping promises and keeping oaths is the honor our family has won over thousands of years. Don't mention setting up any intelligence agencies. The north is peaceful and stable, and there is no need for such things. Okay, you go out first." "Yes, father." Robb gritted his teeth secretly. Eddard's conversation really disappointed him, but he didn't show his emotions. After greeting, he walked towards the door. When Robb opened the door, he suddenly remembered something and turned to Eddard and said, "By the way, father, according to the wild woman I captured, they were forced into a desperate situation in Bolton territory, but the siege leading to our family disappeared inexplicably, so they seized the opportunity and fled here. Father, maybe the north is not as peaceful and stable as you thought." Thank you for the support of the readers who voted and followed the book. You can chat about the chapter comments when you have time. I will continue to work hard on coding. Chapter 13 Undercurrent. The wooden door of the study closed. Robb walked out of the room, leaving Eddard with a solemn expression, who was not sure what he was thinking. "Mother." As soon as he walked out, he saw Catelyn, who was holding a midnight snack tray, standing quietly on the left side of the door. "Robb, do whatever you want. There is no need to report some things to your father. He is a little stubborn." Catelyn looked at her tall and handsome son, a smile on her face, took 2 steps forward to Robb's side, and said softly, "Of course, the premise is that what you do will not harm our family. That's for sure. I just want to protect you. I believe you. Then I will go to bring midnight snack to your stubborn father." Okay, mother. Watching Catelyn enter the study, Robb's depressed mood was somewhat relieved. At least someone would understand him. Father Eddard is indeed an outstanding military strategist and a good lord who is honest and trustworthy, but he is definitely not a competent politician. In the past, the Stark family lived in a remote corner and could live such a simple life, but now King Robert and his party are about to arrive in Winterfell and involve the Stark family in the power struggle in Westeros. Time is running out, so, Lord Robb. Robb was thinking about some plans and unknowingly came to the guard room. Several fully armed Winterfell soldiers hurriedly stood up and saluted. Well, thank you for your hard work. Let me see the female wildling. Yes, I'll open the door for you. Entering the room, where the prisoners were held in the guard room, the female wildling Osha was kneeling on the ground in shackles. She looked up at Robb weakly and said in a hoarse voice, I've told you everything I know. Well, I believe you. I'm here to make a deal with you. What deal? Be my brother's maid and protect him at all times. After 3 years, I'll make you a free man in the north. Hearing this, Osha widened her eyes in surprise. Aren't you afraid that I will hold your brother hostage? Or hurt him? Robb chuckled and replied, you are different from other wildlings. You are very smart. But smart people are afraid of death. Being my brother's servant will allow you to have enough food and clothing, and you will be free in 3 years. How could you be so stupid as to hurt him and then be eaten by my direwolf? Am I right? What a scary threat. By the way, why are you so tolerant of a wildling like me? Don't you southerners kill wildlings when you see them? As Osha was talking, she suddenly stood up, came up to Robb, and said in an ambiguous tone, could it be that you want me to serve you well like that pretty boy? The pretty boy should be Theon. Only he is interested in wild women. Robb complained in his heart, but he took a step back and said, Lady Osha, the smell on you is a little hard to describe. I will ask the servants to take you to bathe and change clothes later. Hearing this, Osha's seductive expression froze, and she stood there awkwardly. Yes, this Osha is the loyal wild woman who has always been with Brandon and Rickon. This group of wild men should have been wiped out in the territory of the Bolton family, but Osha and the other two escaped into the wolf forest by chance. After wandering around in the wolf forest for a few months, they met Brandon who was riding a horse for the first time after recovering from his injury, and then they were caught. It can be seen that the ripples caused by Robb's butterfly flapping its wings have begun to affect the surrounding areas and will gradually spread to Westeros until it affects the whole world. Robb's expedition against the wildlings was passed on by word of mouth by the civilians and merchants in the north, making his name as the young wolf lord spread throughout the north in advance. At the same time, his personal guards were also brave and good at fighting, so they were called wolf guards. The rumors became more and more mysterious as they spread to the south. In some places, Bloodwind was described as a very bloodthirsty dire wolf, and Robb was described as more beastly than human, and liked to eat raw meat every meal. At the intersection of the King's Road, the River Road, and the Valley Road, there is a very famous crossroads inn. Since this place is a must-go for travelers, the business of this inn is booming all year round. Today, a large group of distinguished guests were welcomed here. Jaime, with blonde hair and an unusually handsome face, rode on a tall horse in the mighty armor of the King's Guard, and came to the gate of the Crossroads Inn. Go, clear the inn, we are staying here today. Jaime looked down at the innkeeper at the gate and said, my lord, there are other nobles in the inn. I dare not clear them out. The innkeeper replied with difficulty. Jaime raised his eyebrows, and a majestic aura instantly frightened the innkeeper, feeling that the other party would draw his sword and kill him in the next second. Kingslayer, what? Do you want to kill him? Robert, who was tall and fat, with thick black hair and beard, rode over and called out the nickname that Jaime hated very much. No, your majesty, I will go in and clear the inn for you now. Jaime gritted his teeth secretly and turned over and dismounted without looking back. No, I like drinking with commoners the most. Only you Lannisters, a group of rich sisses, clear the inn at any time. Robert was completely outspoken and said whatever he wanted to say. As soon as he raised his leg, the servant beside him quickly brought a stool for him to dismount easily. Watching Robert enter the crossroads in first, Jaime's eyes were deep, and it was unknown what he was thinking. Don't think too much, let's go in, Jaime. The elegant and graceful blonde queen walked past Jaime and said softly. Jaime nodded and accompanied her in. Then Prince Joffrey frowned and entered with his younger brother, sister, hound and others. Really? There are so many interesting things happening in the north recently? Hahaha, I just came from the south and I don't know anything about it. As soon as Joffrey walked into the inn, he saw his father sitting in a group of people dressed as knights, and talking and laughing loudly. Yes, I heard that the bloodthirsty direwolf of the young wolf eats wild men raw for every meal, so it is very wild, and likes to hunt wild men the most. Listening to their lively conversation, the drinking buddies at the table next to them also spoke loudly about the rumors they had heard. Haha, young wolf lord? Are you talking about Eddard Stark, the Duke of Winterfell? Listening to the anecdotes of his brothers that he had not heard for many years, Robert continued to talk with interest. No, it's Lord Eddard's eldest son, Robb Stark. Huh? His son? Dear, did you hear that? If only our useless son could be as promising as Lord Eddard's son. Robert was a little surprised when he heard this, then he turned his head and shouted to Cersei. Yes, my lord, what you said really hits the nail on the head. Ah, don't say like Lord Robb, as long as my son can join the Wolf Guard, I will be happy to the sky. Listening to the echoes of the people around her, Cersei forced a smile on her face, did not say anything, and went directly to the room on the second floor of the inn. Prince Joffrey's face was distorted, and he was furious. His right hand tightly grasped the sword at his waist, and he had the urge to pull it out and kill people. Haha, I'll treat you to drinks today. You, tell me more about what Wolfguard is. Thank you, sir. What a generous and magnanimous noble lord. Wolfguard. It's in the city of Horwood. Ramsay was walking alone with his hound in the civilian area, in the dark alleys full of the smell of fesses and urine. When he came to a shabby house with red clothes hanging on it, Ramsay looked around and saw that there was no one, so he pushed open the door and walked in. In the room, a man in a hooded cloak was sitting quietly waiting. Ramsay smiled brightly, bowed and saluted. Dear young wolf lord, your loyal hound greets you. Excuse me, is there anything you want me to do? Chapter 14. The king arrives. In the year 298 of the Egan calendar, Westeros enjoyed a long summer for the 10th year. One day during this long summer, Robert Baratheon, the king of the Seven Kingdoms, arrived at Winterfell in the north. Robb, who had his face carefully retouched, combed his hair, wore noble casual clothes, and a black cloak, looked at his father and the king who were walking side by side to the crypt, with an inexplicable chill in his eyes. He noticed from the corner of his eye that Cersei, who was standing next to her mother and talking softly, was looking at him. When Robb and Cersei looked at each other, Cersei's beautiful face bloomed with a kind smile, and she walked towards him gracefully. Your Majesty. Robb bowed respectfully. Cersei waved her hand to indicate that she didn't need to bow. She looked Robb up and down and said softly, I have heard rumors about the young wolf all along the way. As soon as I met him today, I could tell that you will definitely be an outstanding lord in the future. Thank you for the compliment, Your Majesty. However, I just followed the Winterfell army to see how they encircled and suppressed the wildlings. That nickname was given by those ignorant civilians at random. Robb smiled and replied. Really? Cersei raised her eyebrows when she heard Robb's answer, but didn't say much. She called Myrcella and Tommen, the two siblings, and walked towards the main castle. Joffrey followed closely with the hound, looking gloomy. When he passed by Robb, he smiled crookedly. I heard that you are good at swordsmanship. I'm also a master of swordsmanship in King's Landing. Let's find time to spar. Yes, it is my honor to spar with your highness. Robb, who had been unhappy for a long time since he saw Sansa flirting with Joffrey, agreed immediately. Okay. Joffrey clapped his hands happily and immediately changed his gloomy expression. He walked towards the main castle with a smile on his face. It seemed that he had already won the competition. The expressionless hound followed without looking away, fulfilling his duty to protect the prince. Jaime, who was standing in the distance, saw that Cersei and Joffrey had entered the main castle, glanced at Robb, and turned to look for his brother who liked to check the homework of the prostitutes. Robb, these people are not good people, but they have special status. You, Catelyn, who had been silent, put her hand on Robb's elbow and seemed to be hesitant to speak. "Mother, please rest assured, I'm sure." Robb smiled and patted the back of Catelyn's hand to comfort her. Then, he turned his head and looked at Theon standing behind him and tilted his head in the direction where Jaime left. Theon instantly understood what he meant, nodded, and turned around and quietly left Winterfell to greet the team. Jon saw everything, but did not make any other movements or expressions, just stood there silently with an upright posture. Ha ha ha, you were so ignorant of romance back then. Yes, your majesty is the most understanding of romance. There are still many anecdotes about your romance in the Eyrie. Hey, you could start talking about the past embarrassment to me again. The two former heroes who have become fat walked out of the crypt talking and laughing about the past. Everyone saw them coming out and hurriedly bowed their heads respectfully. Catelyn and Robb also straightened their manners and greeted them with smiles on their faces. I was in a hurry to go to the crypt to mourn just now, and I haven't had time to take a closer look at your children. Robert walked in front of Robb and others, smiled and said to Eddard, and then looked at Robb first. Let me see. Huh, is this the young wolf? Very good, a strong and capable warrior. When we were still at the inn at the crossroads, we heard that he defeated the wildlings with a small force. By the way, where is your bloodthirsty direwolf that eats wildlings alive? Listening to Robert's outrageous rumors, Robb smiled bitterly and replied, Your Majesty, those are all rumors spread by people. Don't take them seriously. Bloodwind is upstairs. If you want to see it, I'll call it down. Of course I will. I came to the north specifically to see such an interesting direwolf. Listening to Robert's answer, Robb knew that he had to satisfy his curiosity. On the surface, he pouted and blew a loud whistle, but in fact he conveyed his thoughts to Bloodwind in his heart. Bang! After waiting quietly for a few minutes, a huge grey shadow fell from the sky on the solid wood corridor on the second floor connecting to the main castle. Although it was huge, it did not affect its light movements. It jumped lightly onto an ox cart and made a noise. Then it quickly jumped to the ground and rushed towards Robert and Robb. Oh, what is that? Oh my god. Protect your majesty. The people in Winterfell were not surprised, but the people in King's Landing exclaimed in various ways, and guards ran towards Robert, wanting to protect his majesty the king. Get out of here. Robert was annoyed when he saw this, believing that his brother Ed's Winterfell would not be in danger, and he cursed at the guards. Bloodwind came to Robb and stood still. Only then could everyone see its full appearance carefully. Bloodwind, who had grown a lot again, had a shoulder height of about 1.1 meters, and was now the size of a half-grown colt. The grey wolf hair on his body spread out softly, fluttering in the breeze. The two fangs in the narrow wolf mouth are like two short daggers with cold light. The streamlined body contains strong muscle tissue, and the slender limbs are sharp claws. When it appeared, the human beings in the audience felt a strong sense of oppression, as if they were being watched by a top predator. At this time, Bloodwind's eyes full of intelligence looked at the people in King's Landing, revealing a little teasing. Robb knew that this guy was deliberately scaring people like this, and he reached out and patted Bloodwind's head lightly. Bloodwind, who had already opened his intelligence, immediately pushed his huge wolf head into Robb's arms in a flattering manner, and at the same time, the fluffy wolf tail began to shake left and right. Instantly completed the transformation from predator to beggar. Good. What a mighty and majestic ice wolf. The title of young wolf lord is not wrong. Robert looked at Bloodwind, his eyes full of love, and couldn't help but praise loudly. Thank you, your majesty. Robb heard this, and smiled and nodded to Robert in return. Ned, are there still direwolves in the wild of Winterfell? I want to catch one. No, catch a litter, and bring it back to King's Landing to raise. Robert, who was excited to see the prey, liked Bloodwind more and more the more he looked at him. He turned to Eddard and said. Eddard listened to the king's whimsical words, resisted the urge to roll his eyes and replied, There has never been any trace of direwolves in the wall, and this litter of wolf cubs is the first time I have encountered them in all my years in the north. If your majesty wants to catch them again, I think it's unlikely. TSK. Ned, you're still as boring as before. Robert, whose interest was dampened, waved his hand and stopped dwelling on this issue. He continued to ask, I heard that there are 6 little wolf cubs in total. Are the other 5 as fierce as this one? No, your majesty. The other 5 are about the size of an ordinary wild wolf. Well, that's boring. I'm thirsty, Ned. Bring out your good wine. It's ready, Your Majesty. Please come this way. Watching Robert and Ned enter the main castle of Winterfell, the stewards and servants in the welcoming queue of Winterfell immediately got busy and began to serve these distinguished nobles. Chapter 15 Boring Dinner. Winter Market, a red light district. See you before dinner. I'm going to enjoy my appetizer first. My dear brother, I suggest you come with me now. Our beautiful sister is having a very bad day today, so don't make her angry again. What bad luck, little beauty. I'll come back to pamper you in the evening. This silver deer is a deposit. I'll wait forever, Lord Tyrion. Having ruined his brother's good deeds, Jaime, with a smirk on his face, walked out of a private house in the red light district with the disheveled and short Tyrion. Tyrion was tidying up the expensive clothes made of a mixture of wool, silk and linen with an unhappy face, and asked Jaime, who made our beautiful sister angry? Was it the big fat deer that I love as much as I do? Well, he is one reason. On the other hand, I guess it should be Robb Stark's polite and humble performance that made her very unhappy. Jaime heard his question, put away his smile, thought about what happened when he greeted him just now, and guessed. Aha. The young wolf lord who has been making my ears calloused all the way. So, a young man with a great reputation is not arrogant at all, but humble and polite, making her feel that her son is a waste. Tyrion, who was smart, blurted out without thinking. Can you say it nicely? That's your own nephew. Jaime was a little unhappy when he heard it, raised his left eyebrow, and glared at Tyrion. Okay, you always defend her like that. Humph, I still remember that when I was a kid, you two played a trick on me. You made a hole in my mattress, threw a pile of fresh sheep manure in it, and then sewed it up to make the bed. During that time, I could smell the stench, but didn't know where it was. Tyrion said unhappily, jumping over a mud puddle on the road. Ha 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 ha. I finally told you. Listening to his brother talking about the past funny things, Jaime couldn't help but burst into a bright smile. At this time, Jaime had a handsome face and a sunny smile. It was completely different from the state he was in front of Robert. Maybe he would only show his true self in front of his trusted relatives. Jaime's laughter stopped abruptly. He stopped and turned to glance behind him. What? Someone is following us? Tyrion knew his brother well and guessed the general reason in an instant. Jaime didn't say anything, just nodded at him. Let's go. It's normal for you, the youngest king's good, to enter the city and be careful not to cause trouble. Tyrion patted Jaime's butt without caring and continued to walk forward. Jaime smiled at a dilapidated house behind him and turned to follow. When the two Lannister lions disappeared around the corner, behind the dilapidated house, Theon walked out with a serious expression. Robb watched with some boredom. Little Jon and Owen were competing in drinking at the long table, and many Wolf Guard members around were making a fuss. Well, after Theon's strong persuasion in the middle, all the guards asked Robb to officially name them Wolf Guards. Robb was also happy that his team members liked such an insignificant matter, so he nodded in agreement. He turned around and saw that Robert was still happily inviting people to drink at the VIP seats on the high platform of the banquet hall. Robb had begun to admire this big-bellied king because he drank from the afternoon to the evening. Ed and his wife and Cersei sat beside them, and the banquet hall looked harmonious, warm, and happy. Tyrion Lannister, who Robb was most interested in, mingled with ordinary soldiers like a fish in water, talking about many interesting stories. In fact, he had a good impression of Tyrion, but at this moment the two belonged to different camps, so Robb did not go up to talk to him. Crunch. Crunch. Bloodwind lay beside Robb, biting a large pig hind leg bone with all his strength. As Robb's vision fixed, the current data appeared on it. Name, Bloodwind. Contractor, Robb Stark. Constitution 11, Speed 10, Strength 10, Clan, Psychic direwolf 6, Blood Contract Point 1. Previously, when hunting wildlings, Robb actually killed 4 enemies, 3 of which were Bloodwind, and obtained 14 blood contract points. Yes, Robb can also obtain blood contract points for the enemies killed by Bloodwind. However, in the past 10 days, Robb, who insisted on training every day, only obtained 4 blood contract points by eating, a total of 18 points. When Bloodwind's constitution exceeded 10 points, Robb found that he needed 2 blood contract points to increase one attribute. Therefore, he immediately maximized the benefits of blood contract points and evenly distributed them to speed and strength. Now Bloodwind's 3 attributes are balanced, and his combat power is already very terrifying. However, Robb usually forces it to be low-key, which is his hidden trump card. At the same time, he also proved that hunting animals cannot obtain blood contract points. Well, I haven't encountered extraordinary animals yet, so I don't know the specific situation. In fact, if Robb really wanted to quickly obtain blood pact points, he could take Bloodwind to massacre villages and other territories. But people are human, because they have their moral bottom line. A normal blue star Chinese would never kill for his own selfish interests. So in Robb's cognition, harvesting enemy lives to obtain blood pact points is okay. But killing innocent civilians is not okay. Unable to bear the boredom, Robb quietly got up and slipped out of the banquet hall. He was afraid that Bloodwind would be too big a target, so he sent a message in his mind to let it continue to happily gnaw bones. After walking out of the banquet hall and taking a deep breath, Robb saw his uncle Benjen Stark, who was thin and had grey blue eyes, talking to Jon. "Uncle." Robb smiled and took the initiative to greet him. After a brief conversation, Benjen left Robb and walked into the banquet hall. Jon, who had a rare chance to spend time alone with Robb, spoke first. "Robb, you've changed a lot in this period of time." "Oh, really? Maybe it's the price of growing up." Seeing Jon observing him for so long, Robb finally couldn't help but chuckled and replied, "You know what? I found that many guards and servants in the main castle have become your wolf guards. Robb, what you are doing now is very dangerous." Jon stared at Robb with a serious expression, hesitated and continued, "Father, if he knew, he would definitely stop you." Robb didn't know how much Jon knew, but this kid's sense of smell was indeed very sharp, and he caught some of his secret actions. But Jon certainly couldn't guess what I wanted to do. Thinking about it, Robb said, "Jon, you know, you are the child who is most like your father. You are upright, brave, and taciturn." He paused for a moment, raised his right hand, pointed at the Dark Knight and continued, "But you are better than him. Go, wear black clothes as you wish. Your world is not in this narrow Winterfell, but outside the vast wall." Jon listened to Robb's words quietly, raised his head, and looked in the direction of the north. He pointed, as if he saw a bird flying out of a cage. Robb continued, "All I want to do is protect my family, Winterfell, and the north. That's all." Looking at Robb's sincere eyes, Jon nodded and didn't say anything more, but his eyes were firm and fiery. "Thank you Claude for voting for the first monthly ticket of this book. Well, the system's gift doesn't count. Thank you. I have a plan to decide the weirdness of this and that for posting chapter reviews for each chapter. When the test push comes, I will add more for you. Finally, I would like to thank all the readers who follow my book every day and vote for recommendations. It is not easy to publish a new book, and any support is valuable. Thank you all." Chapter 16 Premeditation. It was not until the big-bellied King Robert finally got drunk and fell on the long table, snoring loudly, that the boring dinner hosted by the Stark family was finally over. The servants carried the drunk nobles back to their rooms. The others in the banquet hall who could still walk went home, and those who were drunk and unconscious slept on the spot. When Robb returned to the room with Bloodwind, Theon didn't know how long he had been waiting. As soon as Robb took him into the room, Theon reported what happened today when he was caught tracking. Theon, let Owen follow Jaime Lannister from tomorrow. When he was in the Mountain Clan, the most cunning prey could not escape his tracking. After a moment of silence, Robb said, "Then, you select a few smart wolf guards and let them spread the news in the villages around Winterfell, saying that there are traces of direwolves in the wolf forest." "Understood. I will report to you after it is done." Theon nodded and agreed, without any extra words. After this period of adjustment, he knew that Robb would tell him if he was willing to talk, and if he was unwilling to talk, no matter how much he asked, it would be useless. "How far have the things I arranged been carried out?" "The goods have been handed over to us, and are on the way." The staff of the main castle have also been arranged recently. Okay, go to bed early. See you in the parade ground tomorrow morning. Good night. Cersei shook the wine glass, looked at Tyrion across the table with disdain, and then said to Jaime beside her, "The Stark family has an outstanding next generation. I have reported this to my father. What do you think? Hunting birds are usually shot in the front, and geniuses are the most likely to die young. I think it is normal for the young wolf to have an accident." Jaime responded to his sister's topic nonchalantly. For him, he didn't care about the young wolf at all, just to deal with Cersei. Cersei agreed with what Jaime said, rubbing the wine glass against her rosy lips, thinking, so, what kind of accident would be reasonable? Living in the master's house, planning how to murder the master's son. You two are really like your father, a qualified Lannister. Tyrion showed a mocking smile, speaking in pleasant but upright words. Can you say good things from your mouth? Since you are enjoying the benefits brought by Lannister, you should fulfill your obligations and responsibilities. Hearing this, Cersei put down the wine glass in her hand, bit her lip, and said to Tyrion, "Of course I can say good things. The girls from south to north have all heard me say good things about them, right, Jaime?" Tyrion first joked to Jaime with a smile on his face, then he put away his smile, and turned to Cersei and said, "Benefits? I have properly cleaned up the piles of shit and urine in Casterly Rock, allowing the Lannisters to live in a clean environment for decades. Do you think I deserve the benefits you have brought to a dwarf like me? And in my father's eyes, I don't even have the surname Lannister. So, don't say such things in front of me." After Tyrion finished speaking, he threw the wine glass in his hand on the wine table, jumped off the chair, and slammed the door. Jaime reached out to dissuade Tyrion, but he looked at his back and didn't know what to say. Cersei stared at the closed door with resentment in her eyes, biting her lips tightly. At dawn the next day, Robb appeared at the gate of the parade ground on time, and all the wolf guards, including Little John who was drunk as mud yesterday, were already standing in the queue in a standard manner. Robb nodded secretly, walked forward, and led them to conduct today's routine training. As the sun gradually rose, the quiet Winterfell slowly began to wake up. The people of Winterfell were already accustomed to the training of Robb and others, but the people from King's Landing would be amazed when they saw it, because Robb was leading the wolf guards in basic queue training. On the corridor outside the parade ground, Joffrey, wearing a gorgeous coat, strolled in it. Under the sunlight, his golden hair was particularly elegant and dazzling. Coupled with the handsome face inherited from his parents, he was indeed a beautiful boy. Many maids in Winterfell were secretly flirting with Prince Joffrey, hoping to get his favor. Although Joffrey was not very interested in women, he enjoyed this atmosphere. When he walked to the parade ground with his hounds and other guards, he saw Robb and others who were training at a glance, so he stopped and watched. Watching Robb and others walking around the parade ground in an orderly manner, it was like a queue training for playing house. Joffrey couldn't help laughing and clapping. "Ha ha ha, you walk so beautifully and neatly. This training method is great. You won't get hurt. Unlike our warriors in King's Landing, we train with real guns and swords, which is easy to bleed, and sometimes even kill people." How could the wolf guards not hear the full mockery? Although they also had some complaints about this training method at the beginning, they didn't dare to speak, because it was Robb's order. But after actual combat, they knew the benefits of this queue training. A small team fighting in a neat queue and following orders is more efficient than an indiscriminate melee on the battlefield, and the chance of survival is greatly increased. So after hearing Joffrey's mockery, before Robb ordered a rest, they could only be angry, but still maintained the neatness and completeness of the queue training. Robb turned a deaf ear to this, and continued to lead the team in fixed queue training. "Dog, have you ever seen any sissy army in King's Landing that is trained like this?" Seeing that Robb didn't dare to respond to him, Joffrey turned his head even more vigorously, and asked the hound who stood up loudly. "First time seeing you, your highness." The hound, wearing the iconic dog-head iron helmet, responded in a deep voice. "Ha ha ha, I'm afraid that from Westeros to Essos, the training method of Winterfell is unique, sissy. Putchy. Hehe." Joffrey had just finished laughing and mocking, and the guards around him, except the hound, couldn't help laughing. Robb, who led the wolf guards to the far side of the parade ground and faced Joffrey and his group, suddenly stopped. He drew the training blunt sword at his waist, pointed it diagonally forward, and shouted loudly, "Draw the sword. Charge." Clang. All the wolf guards drew their blunt swords together, followed behind Robb, and rushed towards Joffrey and his group in an overall formation. Their eyes were filled with murderous intent, as if the people standing opposite were the group of hateful wildlings from before. Clang. Clang. Seeing Robb and the others charging over, and sensing their murderous intent, the hound instantly pulled off his dog head iron helmet, stood in front of Joffrey, drew the long sword from his waist, and assumed a fighting posture with his knees slightly bent. The rest of the guards stopped laughing abruptly, and only after seeing the hound in action did they react, and hurriedly drew their long swords to protect Joffrey. Joffrey, who was being protected in the crowd, had a livid face. He had exchanged cold eyes with Robb before, and felt that the other party was not joking, but really wanted to kill him. "Protect me. Damn it, go, get out of here." Chapter 17 Sword Fight. The parade ground of Winterfell was not too big. In the blink of an eye, Robb and his wolf guards were about to charge in front of the hound. "Stop charging." Robb suddenly shouted loudly, raised his left hand high, clenched his 5 fingers into a fist, and stopped his charge. The wolf guards received his order, and stopped at the same time. Although inertia made everyone move forward a few steps before they could stand firm, the overall formation was still well maintained. The wolf guard's actions made the hound's brows jump inside his helmet. As a well-known person who killed people at the age of 12, he personally participated in cruel wars. Every time a battle charge, the formation that stood in a straight line at the beginning would inevitably become a curved wave shape as the charge progressed, and then it would be a melee that was difficult to distinguish between the enemy and us. Westeros has never had an army that can maintain a neat formation from charge to stop. Although it seems that this neat formation is useless, it can still make him look up to it, because it can do what others cannot. "Everyone, disband." Robb gave the order to disband, and at the same time, put the blunt training sword in his right hand back into the scabbard at his waist, and said to Joffrey and the group of guards with a smile, "Your Highness, our sissy training is over. What do you think?" Joffrey, who was teased by Robb, did not say anything, but his face turned from blue to red, and the veins on his forehead were bulging. "Haha, see, he looks like he was scared to death. He called us sissies, but he didn't even look at himself in the mirror." "Shh, keep your voice down, the sissies will hear it. As the saying goes, the vassal of the vassal is not my vassal." This group of vassal sons in the north did not give the prince any face, and when they turned around to disband, they shouted back at Joffrey's ridicule just now in twas and threes. "Get out." How could Joffrey bear such anger? He kicked the guards beside him away, and squeezed out from behind the hound. He eagerly drew the sword from his waist, pointed at Robb who had turned and left, and shouted, "I, Joffrey Baratheon, ruler of the 7 kingdoms and protector of the realm, the eldest son of Robert Baratheon of the Baratheon family who rules Storm's End. Here, I challenge Robb Stark, the eldest son of the Stark family who rules the north, to a duel." With Joffrey's invitation to a duel, everyone fell into silence, as if the pause button was pressed. Robb put away his smile, turned around and asked him, "Are you serious about challenging me to a duel?" "Of course I'm kidding." Cersei walked in from the parade ground gate with Jaime and the guards, smiling and saying loudly, "If you kids want to practice sword play, then practice. But don't try to play duel. A duel is sacred." Cersei casually turned the duel into a sword play, walked to Joffrey, turned her back to Robb, and straightened his clothes, that were a little messy due to excitement. "Yesterday, I heard you were going to ask Robb for swordsmanship. Why not do it now? Do you think it's okay, my son?" Seeing Cersei's frosty expression, Joffrey suppressed his anger and nodded obediently, "Yes, mother." Cersei turned around, her expression changed again to a spring breeze, and said to Robb with a smile, "Young wolf, please don't beat my son too hard." "Well, I won't disturb your fun." After that, she led Jaime and his party to the main castle. How could Cersei be at ease with her son? When they reached the edge of the parade ground, she and Jaime turned around to observe how the situation developed. Since Cersei's words had come to this, Robb could only learn swordsmanship from Joffrey. In fact, he really wanted to take advantage of the duel and accidentally get rid of the great Joffrey. However, some people are born to like death. After Cersei's interruption, Joffrey's mood gradually returned to normal. Thinking about how he had never been defeated in sword fights with the knights in King's Landing, he shouted that he would not use blunt swords for training, but would use his real swords. I'll stop them. Jaime frowned at the edge of the parade ground and was about to step forward to stop this farce, but Cersei reached out and grabbed his elbow. No. Let them fight with real swords. Cersei's green eyes were erratic, and it was unclear where she was looking, but her ruddy mouth smiled, and she spoke to stop them. Are you crazy? You know that when Joffrey dueled, his opponent always let him win. Our son doesn't know how to use a sword. How could he beat that wolf cub? Use a real sword. What if that wolf cub accidentally misses? Hearing this, Jaime quickly glanced around, making sure that the guards around him couldn't hear him, and then he approached Cersei and whispered quickly, "Yeah, it would be great if Joffrey's swordsmanship talent was the same as yours, but unfortunately." Looking at Jaime's handsome face with anxiety, Cersei subconsciously wanted to reach out and touch him, but thinking of the current environment, she stopped the action and continued, "It is because he has no swordsmanship that I believe the wolf cub can't hurt him. In fact, if he deliberately accidentally hurt Joffrey, I would be even happier. Look over there." After listening to Cersei's words, Jaime looked up. On the wooden corridor on the second floor of the main castle, Robert and Eddard were patrolling here with a group of subordinates and servants. They were obviously attracted by the situation in the parade ground, and were watching from top to bottom with interest. In the past, in order to slay dragons, the stag and the wolf became good friends who could trust their lives and deaths. But the next generation will not only not become friends, but may also become enemies because of this. Isn't this what we want to see? Cersei's words successfully persuaded Jaime. However, he did not intend to watch from a distance at the edge of the parade ground. Instead, he placed his right hand on the hilt of his sword, tapped his index finger, and slowly walked towards Robb and Joffrey. In the middle of the parade ground, the wolf guards and Joffrey's guards formed a circle, with Robb and Joffrey in the center. Joffrey's long sword with a golden lion head as the hilt had been unsheathed, while Robb was still holding the training longsword. He insisted on not using a real sword, because he was really afraid that he would accidentally cut Joffrey. Seeing that Robb was full of flaws, and was holding a blunt sword, Joffrey boldly attacked first. He held the sword with both hands, and placed it on his right waist, rushing towards Robb. When he rushed in front of Robb, he used both hands to push the long sword forward, and made a beautiful straight stab. Although the force and speed of the straight stab were far from enough, the posture was standard and beautiful, and it could be seen that it was practiced. Joffrey wanted to see blood in his heart, so he used all his strength without reservation. Robb moved slightly to the right, stepped aside a little, and easily avoided Joffrey's beautiful straight stab. At the same time, he raised his sword and slashed down with a swift and fierce move, accurately cutting Joffrey's golden lion longsword. Well, before swinging this sword, Robb's mind was the famous scene of the III slash in the Blue Star movie embroidered spring blade in his previous life. Ding. There was a sound of metal collision. Although Robb's blunt sword failed to cut Joffrey's golden lion longsword, but the longsword in his hand was instantly knocked to the ground, and at the same time, the powerful downward force took Joffrey and fell to the muddy ground of the training ground. Puff, the prince ate shit. Haha, King's Landing Swordmaster, I thought it was so powerful. What a scary nickname. Shh, keep it down, the Swordmaster will hear it. The onlookers of the wolf guards laughed first, and then they said what they thought was a quiet joke. Joffrey, his face covered in dirt, stood up with a red face, not even picking up his golden lion sword, stared at Robb with resentment, turned around and ran out of the parade ground. The hound picked up his sword and followed him silently. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 18, Overturning the Chessboard. What a beautiful swordplay, brave young wolf, can I try your swordplay? Jaime, who was standing aside and watching the fight, was angry when he saw Joffrey suffer a loss, but he invited Robb to compete with him with a smile on his face. What? Kingslayer, you want to take advantage of the swordplay competition to stab Robb in the back, like the Mad King? Ha 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 ha. Before Robb could answer James' words, Robert on the second floor laughed loudly to the people below the parade ground. Humph. James heard this annoying voice and knew that he could not help Joffrey for the time being. He did not even look up at Robert and turned around and left the parade ground. Ned, it seems that the shit-smelling King's Landing can only make me give birth to a useless deer, while the cold Winterfell can make you give birth to such a fierce wolf. Robert on the wooden corridor waved to Robb and others who were saluting in the parade ground and turned to Eddard beside him and said. Eddard bowed his head slightly and answered sincerely, "Your Majesty, only fierce wolves can better protect the north for you." Ha ha ha, you are still good at talking. I only speak the truth. As Robert and Eddard left the wooden corridor, the wolf guards on the parade ground burst into laughter. Continuing to discuss the childish play just now, Robb smiled and answered a few words from time to time, but he saw from the corner of his eye that Owen, one of the 6 captains of the wolf guards, quietly left the parade ground. After dinner, Owen came to Robb's room and reported James' movements today. Robb smiled and encouraged him, and then told Owen that as long as James did not go to the direction of the ruined tower, he should not alert the enemy, but just stare at him from a distance. After Owen nodded to show that he understood, he bowed and left. In the next 3 or 4 days, Robb and others exercised every day, but never saw Joffrey again. On the 5th day of the king's arrival at Winterfell, Robert, who had nothing to do every day, wandered around, drank, or talked to prostitutes, finally got a little impatient. Early in the morning, he shouted that he had received news that direwolves had appeared in the wolf forest and forced Eddard to go with him. He also said that, if he couldn't find the direwolf, he would just treat it as a hunting trip. The nobles of the 7 kingdoms basically knew that Robert only liked 3 things after ascending the throne: drinking, hunting, and women. Eddard, who couldn't kill the king's interest, had to order the servants to prepare for the trip. After working for a long time, until the sun rose to the middle position, Robert and Eddard took their personal guards and many servants and set off from the Hunter's Gate west of Winterfell. Logically, as a member of the King's Guard, Jaime must accompany him. But Cersei forced him to stay on the grounds that the prince and the young wolf had lost in swordplay, so she wanted Jaime to teach Joffrey swordplay. I don't know whether Cersei wants Jaime to teach Joffrey or to teach her swordsmanship. Robb, standing by, watched Cersei's performance with a smile on his face and couldn't help but praise her in his heart. Because everything went better than he expected. The night gradually deepened and most people had fallen into a deep sleep. On the wall of the inner gate of Winterfell, a night watch soldier yawned with a long yawn accompanied by white mist. Creak. Creak. Under the wall, there was a sound of carriage driving from weak to strong. Hearing the sound, the night watch soldier looked down without sleep. I saw a horse driver wearing a hooded cloak, driving a carriage full of barrels of cargo slowly approaching. Around the carriage, there were several wolf guards wearing leather armor with the direwolf family emblem guarding it. Open the door. That's mine. Hearing a clear voice behind him, the gatekeeper turned around and saluted. Yes, Lord Robb. Robb, who was with Theon and several wolf guards, smiled and nodded, and watched the gatekeeper turn the noose, and the inner city drawbridge door was lowered with a creak. Thank you, you've worked hard. Robb thanked the night watchman, and turned down the wall. Lord Robb. After the carriage passed through the drawbridge and drove into the inner city, it happened to meet Robb, who was walking down the wall. The carriage driver quickly pulled down his hood and saluted Robb to greet him. Sam, you did a great job. Looking at Sam, who had not seen him for more than half a month, and who was obviously thinner but more mature, Robb praised him sincerely. Thank you for your compliment. It's my honor to serve you. Sam, who was praised, nodded, and replied with a little happiness on his face. During the transportation of the goods, you didn't leave, did you? Were there any problems? Robb looked past Sam and looked at the barrels of goods behind him. When Sam heard Robb asking about the business, he immediately said seriously, I have never left since Lord Ramsay handed these goods to me. I checked them before entering the city just now, and there is no problem at all. That's good. Theon, take them. Deliver them to the designated location as planned. Seeing that Sam was doing things in a proper manner, Robb nodded and said, yes. Theon nodded in agreement, with an expression on his face that he wanted to say something but stopped. Theon, no need to say more. Send someone to notify me when the arrangements are ready. When I give the signal, you will act according to the plan. Be careful. Robb saw his expression and knew what Theon was going to say. After waving his hand to stop him, he finished his instructions and turned to walk towards the main gate of the main castle. Seeing that Robb didn't give him a chance to persuade him, Theon bit his lip and made up his mind and took Sam and the wolf guards to the back of the main castle. The carriage drove slowly for 10 minutes and arrived at the back of the main castle against the wall. There was a circle painted with white paint. Theon directed Sam and the wolf guards to move the barrels of cargo on the carriage to the white circle. The wolf guards had been trained to obey orders. Although the cargo had a pungent smell, they still followed orders without any unnecessary questions. Boom. A barrel of cargo was placed heavily on the ground by 2 wolf guards. Theon and Sam's faces suddenly changed. They shouted in unison, "Be careful." They looked at each other and understood that the other knew what the cargo was. They were obtained by Ramsay through special channels. Wildfire. Send you away, or 1,000 miles away. Robb, whistling the Chinese song of Blue Star in his mouth, walked in the corridor of the main castle. He tried to use this method to relieve the suppressed and irritable emotions in his heart. Fully armed, Daisy walked out of the darkness of the corridor and came behind Robb to report in a low voice, "Lord Robb, Lady Catelyn and other young masters and young ladies are asleep, and there are people waiting at the door. Our people took turns guarding the guest rooms in the main castle today. All the Lannisters are here, and no one has left." "Very good. If the wildfire does not kill all the Lannisters, then we will end their lives." Robb has great trust in the 6 captains of the Wolf Guard, whose loyalty has been tested. This long-planned plan was told to them 3 days in advance. The 6 captains did not have no objections to Robb's plan. For example, Theon repeatedly advised him to think about it again. But with Robb's firm will, they all chose to help Robb complete the plan. That's right. What Robb wants to do now is overturn the chessboard. Thank you reader 202,107,251,332,479 for the monthly ticket, and thank you for reading, commenting, and voting for recommendations every day. There is a recommendation for this book this week, and I will add another chapter for you. Well, including the extra chapter 1 mentioned earlier, there will be 2 extra chapters in total. I hope everyone will continue to support this book. Chapter 19 Green Light. Tonight, Robb is going to kill Cersei, Jaime, Tyrion, Joffrey and other Lannisters. Don't say Myrcella and Tommen are still children. They are innocent. Tyrion has done nothing bad. He is innocent. If Cersei and Joffrey are allowed to continue, isn't Eddard, the father who was beheaded, innocent? Isn't Brandon, who was crippled, innocent? Isn't Rickon, who died tragically in front of Jon in the Battle of the Bastards, innocent? Isn't Sansa and Arya, who suffered many hardships before returning home, innocent? Isn't the tens of thousands of northern soldiers who set out from the north and died tragically in a foreign land innocent? Fuck innocence. Fuck guest rights. Let's not talk about the future bloody wedding. Just Robb's ancestors in the Chinese country in his previous life taught that we should use all means to extinguish the dangerous flames. There are countless hangman banquets in China from ancient times to the present. Well, Theon should need some time to prepare. Daisy, notify the captains other than Theon to wait for orders. As long as I give the signal, proceed as planned. Shaking off the distracting thoughts in his mind, Robb turned his head and issued an order to Daisy behind him. "Yes, Lord Robb." Daisy nodded in agreement, saluted Robb, and disappeared into the darkness of the corridor again. The guest room area, where Lannister lives, is located in the back half of the main castle. The wildfire is also mainly concentrated on the outer wall of this area. Robb has made full preparations for today and has already brought professionals to survey the building structure of the main castle. The collapse in the direction of the guest room of the main castle will have some impact on the overall structure, but it is not to the point where a single hair will move the whole body. Think about it, the main castle in the inner city is the safest and last resort for the nobles. If the main castle collapses so easily, the trebuchet of the siege party accidentally collapses part of the main castle, destroying the overall structure of the castle and causing it to collapse completely, then the nobles will be wiped out instantly. Snap, snap. Robb walked down the quiet castle stairs with only his own footsteps in his ears. He was now going to return to his bedroom and stay beside Bloodwind, who had been waiting for him. When Theon sent someone to notify him, he would let Bloodwind send out the signal that had been set. That was Bloodwind's wolf howl. Growing to this size, Bloodwind's wolf howl had a very terrifying penetrating power. If nothing unexpected happened, his wolf howl would be heard throughout Winterfell tonight, including the winter market. As for the plan after success, Robb also had some rough plans in his mind. The first, the most optimistic scenario, was that the wildfire successfully killed all the Lannisters, and then the various accidental traces he had reserved in advance took effect, and the king and his father returned and attributed the incident to an accident. After all, everyone, including the king, would encounter accidents, right? As for how angry the old lion Tywin was, he didn't care. The North was never afraid of any foreign enemies, except the Targaryens with dragons. The second, a more optimistic scenario, was to kill most of the Lannisters, and he and the Wolf Guards would take action to eliminate the survivors. Then, he was sentenced by the king and his father. If the crime was not punishable by death, he would bear it silently, and then wait for an opportunity to develop and make a comeback. If it was a capital crime, the means of escaping from prison that he had prepared would work. After escaping from prison, he took the property he had collected during this period and the people who were willing to leave with him, and fled to the continent of Essos. The third, very pessimistic situation, was that the main Lannisters were not killed at all, and they escaped from the encirclement of the Wolf Guards. Then, Robb would directly launch a coup, and take control of the entire Winterfell. Although there would be various problems such as unstable foundations and the refusal of the vassals to recognize him, he could only take one step at a time. After all, Robb was a human, not a god, and could not grasp all the situations. As his thoughts flowed, Robb came to the door of his bedroom. When he opened the door, a green light occupied his entire field of vision. "Robb, the Lannisters have entered an ambush, and it's our turn." The familiar voice of Theon came to his ears before the effect of the green light on Robb's eyes disappeared. Robb suddenly closed his eyes and opened them again. His vision had been restored. He was now in a redwood forest that had lost all its branches and leaves and looked bare. "Blow the horn and attack with all your forces." Robb heard himself say this before he asked Theon about the situation. Moo. Then, a heavy horn sounded from behind. Robb began to drive his horse unconsciously and rushed out of the redwood forest. Although he could not control his body, his eyes could still observe the surrounding situation. Around him, there were cavalrymen wearing standard male armor and carrying the direwolf flag of the Stark family. Theon followed closely beside him. After rushing out of the redwood forest, Robb saw a valley plain area surrounding a small river. A group of about 2,000 cavalrymen with a red background and a golden roaring lion flag were chasing a group of 200 or 300 cavalrymen from the Tully family in front of them with a trout flag. As the horn sounded, countless northern soldiers appeared from the three sides of the forest, frightening the Lannister cavalry in the center of the valley plain, so that they dared not continue to chase, but began to turn around and retreat in the direction they came from. Unfortunately, the flag of the north also appeared behind them. The Lannister cavalry paused for a moment, and one of them jumped out first and galloped towards Robb's direction, followed by more than 2,000 cavalrymen, launching a desperate final charge. Arrows, long swords, blood, screams. On such a large-scale battlefield, the themes are always these. The number of northern cavalry in Robb's direction is roughly more than 5,000. Under Robb's leadership, the northern cavalry, which is twice as large as the enemy, tightly entangled the Lannister cavalry. Robb, who had been protected by the guards beside him, only killed 2 or 3 enemy cavalrymen with his own hands. When the northern cavalry from other directions surrounded him, there were no more Lannister cavalry in front of him. Kill. A roar suddenly came from the front, and Robb looked up at the source of the sound. Jaime, wearing Lannister lion plate armor, was covered in blood and riding a horse with a sword in hand. Ordinary northern cavalrymen were no match for him. They could not survive the second blow of Jaime's sword and fell off their horses. The 2 Stark brothers, Torhan and Eddard, who were guarding Robb, immediately rushed forward with several guards. Theon drew his bow and aimed. Although the view was blocked by the northern soldiers around him, he could put some pressure on Jaime. Robb knew Torhan and Eddard, and their swordsmanship was quite good. But after the two of them fought with Jaime for a few moves, Jaime suddenly jumped forward and jumped towards Torhan. He held the long sword tightly with both hands and pierced through Torhan's horse from bottom to top, piercing Torhan through. Torhan. Eddard's face changed drastically and he roared. He rode his horse and raised his sword to slash at Jaime, who had lost his horse. Whoosh. A small dagger flew out of Jaime's hand and pierced Eddard's left eye, and he fell off his horse instantly. After killing the two Stark brothers, Jaime, who lost his horse, had no mobility and could not affect Robb at all. He was then surrounded and captured by heavy cavalry. Thanks to the early bird who voted for 2 monthly tickets, and the big guys who voted and read every day. There will be 3 updates tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Please support this book. Chapter 20. It's a foregone conclusion. What happened next was that Robb took the captured Jaime to report the victory to Catelyn. Then Jaime used provocation to challenge Robb to a life and death duel. Robb, who was watching a movie, had already realized that this was the Battle of the Whispering Wood in the original play, but he couldn't move at all until a bird called wow from behind him. When Robb opened his eyes again, Theon's voice was beside him again. Over and over again, Robb had been participating in the Battle of the Whispering Wood. As the number of repetitions increased, Robb found that his body seemed to have loosened a little, and he was able to move his head a little. Moreover, every time he met Catelyn on the hillside with Jaime, he would hear the bird call behind him before the next repetition. Finally, this time, when Jaime invited Robb to a duel, Robb turned his neck stiffly, like a rusty robot, and looked behind him. On a low branch, a three-eyed crow with green eyes on its forehead was staring at him closely. Wow. They can't die now. Wow. They are part of the future. Suddenly, the three-eyed raven flapped its wings and uttered sharp and unpleasant words. Robb knew who it was, but although he could turn his head, he couldn't speak. The one who wants to destroy the future. Wow. Who are you? Who are you? You are not Robb Stark. Wow. When the three-eyed raven shouted the last sentence more and more urgently, it spat out a mouthful of blood, and its whole body exploded with a bang. At the same time, the scene that had trapped Robb for a long time disappeared rapidly, and a bright light occupied his vision, but this time it was not green, but white. Ouch. Robb, God bless him, he's awake. You go prepare liquid food, I'll go inform Lady Catelyn. Robb, whose vision was blurred, heard several familiar voices. He tried to open his eyes wide, and the scenery in front of him gradually became clear. Robb was lying on his big bed at this moment. Theon stood on his right, and Bloodwind lay on his left. The eyes of the man and the wolf were full of concern. A little further away, Daisy and Owen were standing at the door. When they saw Robb's gaze, they nodded and saluted, then turned around and went out to do their own things. Robb, you must feel weak. Do you remember what happened? Theon looked at Robb carefully and asked softly, what happened? Robb opened his mouth to speak, but found that his throat was hoarse and uncomfortable, and it was difficult to speak. Robb, this is the 13th day of your coma. Theon's words struck Robb like a bolt of lightning. 13 days, Lannister? Lord Eddard agreed to become the Hand of the King. They set off for King's Landing with the Lannisters 3 days ago. At the same time, Lord Benjen took Jon and the Imp to the Wall. Of course, Theon knew what he was going to ask, and he told him what had happened recently. After a moment's hesitation, he continued, the person I sent to notify you that night found you fainted at the door of your room and couldn't be woken up, so he immediately notified me. Without your signal, the plan could not proceed. After quietly hiding the wildfire, I notified Daisy to cancel the plan, and then told Lady Catelyn. The next day, the king and Lord Eddard rushed back to Winterfell, and that afternoon, Brandon fell from the ruined tower. At the end of his speech, Theon lowered his head in shame, somewhat afraid to face Robb. Now that Robb knew that there was a supernatural power behind the scenes, he did not blame Theon. Owen, Osha, because of your coma, everyone was concerned about you. Owen was also very worried about you, so he was guarding your bedside at the time. And Brandon used his familiarity with Winterfell to get rid of Osha's followers. When Osha found him, he had already fallen under the ruined tower. Theon told the matter clearly in one breath. Robb nodded, pointed to the cup on the desk, and said hoarsely, water. Theon immediately took the cup of water, and while reaching out, to help Robb drink water. He said, I have been forcing you to drink some milk and honey water these days. Your body is very weak now. Don't be stubborn. Robb could feel his physical condition. He nodded and let Theon serve him. Robb, whose throat was obviously much better after drinking water, coughed lightly and tried to speak. Ahem. You take Bloodwind, Owen and Little John to catch up with my father and the king's team. After catching up, follow them from a distance, and don't let them find you. When they rest at the crossroads inn, secretly bring back the lady and Nymeria. Bloodwind will help you. As long as you don't reveal your identity, you can do it at any cost. Theon, remember, bring them back at all costs. After giving his order to Theon, Robb turned around and conveyed to Bloodwind the idea of following Theon to bring back the lady and Nymeria. Bloodwind, whose intelligence had long been awakened, had no difficulty understanding such a simple command. It whimpered to show that it understood, and at the same time, conveyed to Robb its concern for him. By the way, let the brothers Torhan and Eddard take a few wolf guards to guard my room, and let Daisy go to guard Brandon. That's it. Theon, Bloodwind, you go. Robb, who felt weak, did not show off. After arranging everything properly, he waved his hand to let Theon and Bloodwind set off. Theon wanted to wait for Daisy and Catelyn to come back before leaving, but Bloodwind jumped directly behind him and pushed him towards the door with his huge wolf head. After seeing the man and the wolf leave, Robb suddenly showed a face full of anger and punched the edge of the solid wood bed with a weak fist. His heart was full of resentment, not resentment towards others, but himself. He hated his self-righteousness and his confidence in thinking that he could overturn the chessboard and rewrite the fate of his family. He hated his powerlessness and being trapped in a repetitive dream by the three-eyed raven without any ability to fight back. If it weren't for Theon and others' careful care, he would have starved to death in his dream. After a while of venting, knowing that what had happened could not be changed, Robb closed his eyes and began to think about how to plan next. After a while, Catelyn hurried to Robb's room. When she saw Robb lying on the bed, she covered her mouth with her hands and cried silently. Two sons fell into a coma one after another, and her husband and daughters left their hometown again. This mother has endured too much. Mother, don't worry, I will take care of everything in the future. I promise. Robb heard the sound, opened his eyes, and looked at the crying Catelyn, smiling and whispering. Catelyn heard the words, and her face showed a contradictory expression of smiling and crying. She threw herself on Robb's bed, and hugged Robb tightly on the bed. After Theon arranged all of Robb's orders, he and Bloodwind, Owen, and Little John rode in the direction of the King's Road. Robb woke up, and the servants in the main castle were busy, making preparations to serve their master. No one noticed that a raven had quietly flown into the sky. Thank you Zunappy for your monthly vote, and everyone who reads and votes every day. Today's recommendation, please continue to read. Reading data is very important now. Thank you. Chapter 21 Saving the Direwolf. On the 5th day of riding, Owen, who had been riding in front, easily found the traces of Robert and Eddard. After all, such a large group of people walking on the King's Road left too many traces. Theon and the other two followed far behind with Bloodwind, waiting for them to go to the crossroads inn to rest. Without the influence of unexpected forces, the power of fate is so irresistible. Playful Eria followed the butcher's apprentice and played sword fighting games with branches by the tributary of the Trident River. Joffrey, who was taught by Cersei, once again became a sunny blonde boy and walked along the river with Sansa, who was obsessed with him. Theon, Little John and Bloodwind, who were quietly following Eria with Nymeria, were wearing a hooded cloak and a veil on their faces. Things developed quickly. When Eria wanted to drive Nymeria away sadly, Theon knew the opportunity had come. He reached out and patted Bloodwind's head, which was almost covered by the bushes, even when he was lying down. The clever Bloodwind certainly understood what he meant. After he stood up, he quietly headed towards Nymeria with a predatory posture. After a while, Bloodwind brought Nymeria, who was tamed by him and was very well behaved, to Theon's side. The mission is halfway done. Go and meet up with Owen. Theon wanted to learn from Robb and scratch Bloodwind's chin as a reward, but Bloodwind dodged it with a look of disgust. He turned around and said to Little John without any embarrassment, Owen had been responsible for keeping an eye on the lady who stayed obediently in the Crossroads Inn, but it didn't run around at all, so Owen had no chance to enter the inn guarded by the Golden Angry Lion and the Crowned Stag soldiers. When Theon and the others came to meet up, they continued to wait for the opportunity. Night slowly fell, and torches were lit in the Crossroads Inn. Suddenly, there was a commotion from the direction of the inn. As an archer, Theon, who had excellent eyesight, saw it at a glance. Arya was escorted to the inn by Lannister soldiers. When they entered the inn, many knights and guards rushed into the inn, wanting to see how the king would deal with this incident. Seeing that most of the soldiers' attention was attracted, Theon nodded to Owen, patted Bloodwind's head, and touched the stables behind the inn where the lady was tied. In fact, Theon and Owen could handle this matter completely. They brought Bloodwind with them because they were afraid that they could not control the lady, even though she was always docile. But she was a direwolf after all. The lady was tied to a pillar next to the stable with a thick iron chain. Her innocent eyes had no idea what was going to happen. In order to show his attitude, Eddard brought all the northern soldiers he brought out to look for Arya, leaving only Jory in the inn to report to him at any time. Therefore, the lady was guarded by 2 Lannister soldiers wearing golden lion armor. Snap! A small stone fell on the stable pillar, making a crisp sound. The 2 Lannister guards turned their heads to check subconsciously. 2 pairs of black hands holding short-handled daggers stretched out from the darkness, covered their mouths, and easily cut their unprotected necks. Only when the guards who were struggling with their mouths covered, did Theon and Owen let go of their hands, and began to search for the key to the chain on their bodies. Tap, tap, tap. A sound of rapid and fine footsteps came. Seeing Arya being escorted to the king, Jory, who was anxious, was ready to ride to inform Eddard. But who would have thought that, as soon as he passed the corner behind the inn, he saw 2 masked men looting the Lannister soldiers who fell to the ground. Clang! Jory subconsciously drew his long sword, and was about to shout to warn Bloodwind. Theon, who had not yet had time to get up, said in his heart, "Oh no," and immediately called for support in a low and hurried voice. A grey shadow flashed past Theon, and Jorah's right hand holding the sword was instantly bitten by Bloodwind, and he fell heavily to the ground. Perhaps because Jory was a familiar person, Bloodwind did not directly attack his neck, and even spared his wolf mouth. Otherwise, Jorah's fate would be either instant death, or becoming a one-armed swordsman like Jaime in the future. Ahem. Bloodwind. Jory, who was choked by his shouting and coughed, immediately recognized the iconic Bloodwind. "Captain Jory, I don't want to kill you. Let me take the lady away. This is Robb's intention." Seeing that his whereabouts were exposed, Theon tore off the veil covering his face, and whispered to Jory, who was suppressed by Bloodwind. "Robb is awake. Your target is the lady? Ahem. You let Bloodwind get up first." Jory tilted his head to see Theon's appearance, and he was relieved. Perhaps he was a little uncomfortable being suppressed by Bloodwind. He coughed and said, "Okay, Bloodwind." After years of getting along, Theon believed that Jory would not sell them to the Lannisters, so he called Bloodwind away. "No time to talk. Seeing Bloodwind here, I believe this is Robb's order. You take the lady away now. Then let Bloodwind bite the necks of the 2 guards again." Jory stood up, holding his bleeding right hand, and said to Jon, "By the way, let Bloodwind bite my leg again, so that my excuse of not being able to pursue will become a reality." Theon said nothing more, nodded to Bloodwind, and Bloodwind lowered his head and bit Jorah's thigh. Hiss. Jory bit his lips tightly, and took a breath of cold air in pain. When Bloodwind loosened his grip, he fell to the ground, and said to Theon, "You go quickly, I'm going to call for help." Owen, who found the key, had already untied the lady's chain. Hearing this, Theon nodded to Jory, put on the scarf again, and led them into the darkness quickly. Jory, with a face full of cold sweat, saw them disappear, and finally shouted out of control, "Ah! Someone come quickly." What happened next was basically the same. Cersei, who saw that both direwolves were missing, had nowhere to vent. She buried her hatred for the Stark family deep in her heart, waiting for the final outbreak in the future. "Jory, don't go to King's Landing with me tomorrow. Find a caravan to Winterfell, and go back with them to recover from your injuries." In the inn, Jory, whose wounds were bandaged by the herbalist of the King's Landing team, lay on the bed. Eddard stood beside him and said to him, "Yes, Lord Eddard." Jory nodded and replied. Eddard suddenly opened the door and looked outside. After confirming that no one was there, he came to Jorah's bedside and whispered, "They may not be able to tell the wounds because of the bloodstains. I can be sure that the wounds on your body and the wounds on the Lannister soldiers were definitely not bitten by Lady Nymeria. Was it Bloodwind?" "Yes. Robb has woken up, and Theon was ordered to bring back Lady Nymeria." Jory would naturally not hide the truth from Eddard. He wanted to find an opportunity to tell Eddard, but Eddard saw through his lie directly. "Well, thank you for your hard work. Go back and heal your wounds." Eddard looked thoughtful and concerned at Jory, then turned and walked out of the room. When Eddard returned to his room, Arya was sitting in front of the bed waiting for him with sadness. "Father, I want to go home. Do you think are Robb and Bran awake?" Arya, who had experienced too much today and was very sad, immediately threw herself into Eddard's arms and spoke. "Robb is awake now. I believe Bran will be fine under his care." Ed stroked his daughter's soft hair, looked towards the north, and said firmly, "What happened today made him wonder whether Robb's arrangement was a coincidence or he knew in advance that something unexpected would happen." But no matter what, Ed firmly believed in his son Robb, that he would protect the Stark family. There will be another update tonight. Chapter 22, Control of Military Power, Part 3. On the Winterfell training ground, Robb was doing recovery training. When he just woke up 3 days ago, his body was indeed very weak. But after a few days of high protein food to supplement nutrition, coupled with his original good physical fitness, in just 3 days, his body has basically recovered. As soon as the training was finished, Torhan, who was standing on the left, came forward and handed him a towel. After Theon led the team out, the two Stark brothers followed Robb all the time. Smiling and nodding, Robb took the towel to wipe his sweat. He estimated in his heart that Theon and others should still be on the way to catch up. "Ed, gather all the wolf guards who have no mission. Torhan, you go and gather the officers of Winterfell." Robb no longer wanted to think about whether Theon could complete the task successfully. He was sure that his body had recovered and immediately ordered Eddard and Torhan beside him. "Yes, Lord Robb." After the two Stark brothers left, they immediately notified Robb's order. After waiting for a while, except for the 6 wolf guards who had a mission, the rest of the wolf guards lined up neatly in the parade ground. The officers of Winterfell, including Sir Rodrik, were slower and took more time to gather. "Brothers and sisters, I was not feeling well some time ago. Thanks to your daily protection, I can recover my health again." Robb began his speech loudly, and with a tone of gratitude, he bowed to the wolf guards. Robb stood up and reached out to stop the wolf guards who were a little agitated when they saw him salute. He continued to speak loudly. "During the time I slept, I had a very long nightmare. I saw the water on Winterfell, the flags of the northern nobles that were cut off, and the crying people of the north. You may think that this is just my dream and it doesn't mean anything, but the wildlings I captured told me that outside the wall, a wildling king is preparing to gather 100,000 wildling warriors to attack the wall. It is said that they also have legendary giants. Of course, in our understanding, they will never be able to climb over the wall. But what if they succeed? Are you willing to watch your family fall, your relatives die tragically, or live a life worse than death, and become food for those wildlings?" At the end, Robb was very emotional and pointed to the north and shouted loudly, "No, never. Kill them all." The wolf guards shouted loudly, their emotions were completely mobilized. After spending this time together, they have already admired Robb very much, so most people choose to believe what he said. The officers of Winterfell are completely different, including Sir Rodrik, who followed along. But in their hearts, they are more disapproving. In their hearts, the wall has stood for 1,000 years, let alone 100,000 wildlings. Even 1,000,000 wildlings cannot conquer it. In the name of Robb Stark, the Guardian of the North, the designated heir of Eddard Stark, the Duke of Winterfell, and the acting Lord of Winterfell, I declare that Winterfell will enter a state of combat readiness from today. All the troops of Winterfell will be controlled by me and obey my command. Robb certainly saw the completely different performances of the Wolf Guard and the officers of Winterfell. But he didn't care about it at all, and directly announced loudly the ultimate purpose of today's performance. Robb announced that he would take full control of the army, and Sir Roderick had no objection, because he was wholeheartedly and loyally serving the Stark family. The officers below him began to talk about it. The faction structure of the officers of Winterfell is very simple, divided into 3 parts in total. The cavalry officers were responsible for reconnaissance, information transmission and warhorse management. The archers were responsible for city defense and law and order maintenance, and the logistics officers were responsible for logistics support. The officers of each department were managed from top to bottom, and orders were also conveyed in this way on weekdays. In fact, each military department was equivalent to 3 independent departments, and the distribution of military equipment and materials and the distribution of their own work were all controlled by the officers of each department. Robb's order had been announced, and the military power was directly concentrated in his hands. These officers would naturally have discussions. If you have any objections, speak up now. Don't discuss it privately. Robb didn't want to play tricks with these officers. Anyway, his original plan was to let the Wolf Guard replace them, so he spoke bluntly. The officers of Winterfell were not fools. Hearing Robb's stern tone, no one dared to discuss it privately. Everyone immediately stood up with their heads held high, and no one would be the first to speak out. After all, Robb was Eddard's designated heir, and he was also the famous young Wolf Lord. The army of Winterfell originally belonged to the Stark family, so it was only natural for him to control the military power. Besides, the combat effectiveness of his Wolf Guards was obvious to all. When the wildlings were exterminated last time, the more than 190 soldiers who were responsible for the outer perimeter alert had already praised them to the sky after returning to the city. Therefore, the military power of Winterfell was nominally controlled by Robb without any ripples. The next day, after Robb privately lectured the Wolf Guards, he disbanded them and began to control the 3 major military systems of Winterfell. For officers who were obedient and transferred, Robb would still use them. After all, when he summoned the vassal army in the future, he needed his own officers to supervise and manage. And for officers who were disobedient and unwilling to give up power, he took out the black materials obtained through certain channels and directly imprisoned them, letting them choose either death or wearing black clothes. Mr. Luwin and Sir Roderick fully supported Robb's various legal and compliant methods. Because, when Eddard was not there, they regarded Robb as the object of loyalty. Catelyn had been guarding Brandon's bed, ignoring all these. In fact, she had no right and would not interfere with Robb. Except for Daisy, who insisted on staying to protect Robb. The other 24 Wolf Guards were scattered and controlled the 4,300-man army of Winterfell. They obeyed Robb's orders and taught the Winterfell soldiers their previous training content every day. These were all Robb had considered in advance. The basic quality of the Winterfell soldiers was still quite high. If you want to increase their combat effectiveness in a short time, you can only strengthen their equipment and strengthen the formation training. Robb has no money and resources to strengthen the equipment now. Although the north is vast, it can be said to be very poor compared to the south. It is impossible to compare with Lannister, who has gold mines, in terms of equipment. Then what about adding some ancient Chinese equipment from the previous life? It is not feasible. After all, the Winterfell soldiers have been training for 10 or even dozens of years, using the current standard weapons. You replace the familiar standard longsword with a tang sword. Let's not talk about who is better or worse. For the Winterfell warriors, the tang sword is absolutely a strange and uncomfortable weapon, and they cannot adapt to it in a short period of time. If they are forced to use the tang sword to fight on the battlefield, their combat effectiveness will definitely decrease instead of increase, and there will be no suspense. However, many weapons and equipment of the Chinese ancestors are better and more practical than those of Westeros. Robb plans to slowly test and popularize these in the future. The only remaining option is to train the Winterfell soldiers in formation, and the effect has been shown in the Wolf Guards. Not surprisingly, an army with strict discipline and formation is definitely more powerful than an army that disperses when it charges. Add one more chapter. Thank you to the readers who vote, comment, and read every day. Please continue to support. Chapter 23 Surprise. When Theon, Bloodwind and his party completed their mission and returned to Winterfell, half a month had passed since they set out. Eddard was still on the King's Way to King's Landing with Robert. The military power of Winterfell was firmly controlled by Robb in name and in reality. At this time, Robb was taking Daisy to the Maester's Tower near the Hunter's Gate, west of Winterfell. Maester Luwin was facing them and introducing the medical supplies on the table, milk of the poppy and sleeping wine. These two potions are used to relieve pain, but some people with weak wills will indulge in them. The smear ointment contains mustard seeds, nettles and baker's yeast, which can be used to apply to wounds to prevent wound infection. Willow bark and silk thread are generally used to suture larger wounds. These are the medicines we can use on the battlefield. Thank you for your explanation, Mr. Luwin. What is the price of these medicines? Can they be used on soldiers on a large scale? Robb listened to Mr. Luwin patiently and then threw out the key points he was concerned about. The prices of milk of the poppy and sleeping wine are relatively high, so they cannot be used by ordinary soldiers. They are only suitable for officers or knights. Mirish ointment is not expensive, but the route from Essos to Westeros is long, and if we want to order in large quantities, it will take a long time. As for willow bark and silk thread, they are cheap, and there is no problem using them for all soldiers. Maester Luwin patiently answered Robb's questions. Well, Master Luwin, I think our army's post-war treatment is too backward, and the mortality rate of the wounded is too high. Many people were wounded by swords, and they directly used boiling water to burn the wound, to stop bleeding and prevent infection. So, I want to set up a special battlefield rescue team to carry out post-war treatment. Robb expressed his thoughts. After all, when it comes to knowledge, the Maesters are definitely more knowledgeable. Maester Luwin nodded, thought for a moment and said, there are battlefield rescue teams, like you mentioned in the south, but they are rare in the north. Perhaps for the poor northern nobles, the value of these medicines is much more valuable than the lives of injured soldiers. If you want to set up such a battlefield rescue team, I can teach them some first aid and suturing measures. As for ointments, you can write to ask Lord Wyman Manderley, the Earl of White Harbor. As the mouth of the north, White Harbor has trade with the 9 major city-states in Essos. Thank you for your answer. I will recruit battlefield rescue soldiers. Please teach them when the time comes. Of course, Lord Robb. Then we will take our leave first, Master Luwin. After saying goodbye to Maester Luwin, Robb and Daisy just walked down the Maester Tower and saw Theon and his party who came to report to him. Swift Bloodwind rushed to Robb's side at the first time, skillfully put the wolf head into Robb's arms, waiting for him to tickle him. Of course Robb did not disappoint it. While he was waiting on Bloodwind, who had just returned from a long journey, he was also concerned about the hard-working Theon and the other two. After listening to Theon's briefing, Robb nodded and said to him, "Thank you for your hard work. The Winterfell army is now led by the Wolf Guards. I have already arranged your positions. Have a good rest today and start your duties tomorrow." "Robb, what positions did you arrange for us? How many troops do you want us to lead?" Theon, who was exhausted and tired, became energetic at this moment and asked without hesitation. "You and Owen are the 2 commanders of the archer troops. Little John and Eddard are in charge of the cavalry troops, and Lord Torhan is in charge of the logistics support troops. In terms of the number of people, the archer troops include 500 archers, 700 spearmen, and 1,500 ordinary infantry. The cavalry troops include 300 lancers, 200 archers, and 800 light cavalry. Finally, there are 300 logistics support troops. By the way, a special battlefield rescue team will be added in the future. I just confirmed it with Master Luwin." Robb was still very patient with the main generals under his command and explained to them the composition of the troops they belonged to. "I will definitely train them well." Theon, who has always been a marginal person in Winterfell, held so much military power for the first time. His blood was boiling, and he wanted to win a victory immediately to prove himself. Owen and Little John were also very excited, and they all had expressions of dying for their friends. "Well, take a good rest today. Then I'll go first. We'll take our leave, Lord Robb." When Theon and the other two, who were tired from the journey, were persuaded by Robb to rest, he finally had time to look at Lady Nymeria, whose fate had been changed. I don't know if they were well taught by Bloodwind on the journey back home, The two direwolves, the size of adult wild wolves, sat quietly beside them like two well-behaved Alaskans. "Lady, Nymeria, come here." "Ha ha." Robb called out to them. As a result, the two cold direwolves did not respond at all. "Let them come." Robb stopped his hands that had been tickling Bloodwind for a long time and spoke to it. "Woo." Uncle Bloodwind, who was served comfortably, raised his head and growled at them, and the two immediately ran to Robb's side. It seems that they only obey the orders of the leader of the tribe, Bloodwind. Robb nodded secretly and stretched out his hand towards Nymeria's fluffy head. As a result, no bloody words appeared. He stretched out his other hand to touch Lady's head, but the result was the same. After that incident, Robb now regarded the three-eyed raven as his enemy. The only thing that could deal with supernatural power was the bloody Goldfinger. So Robb thought about changing the fate of Lady and Nymeria to add new changes to the bloody Goldfinger. As a result, he thought too much. But when he looked at Bloodwind intently, he found an unexpected surprise. Name: Bloodwind. Contractor: Robb Stark. Constitution: 11. Speed: 10. Strength: 10. Clan: Psychic direwolf. 6. Wolf pack: Soldier wolf, Nymeria, Servant wolf, Lady. Blood contract points: 5. The bloody contract has an additional wolf pack. Judging from the literal meaning, it should be that Bloodwind will take Nymeria and Lady into his own wolf pack. The other 3 wolves in the tribe still have their owners and cannot be incorporated into the wolf pack. Robb already has the answer in his heart because he had just touched his summer when he visited Brandon not long ago. Rickon was also in the room with Shaggy Dog at that time, and he also touched it. However, their names were not included in Bloodwind's wolf pack today, and as for John's ghost, that was even more impossible. As for the meaning of soldier wolves and servant wolves given by the blood pact, Robb estimated that it should be their status in the wolf pack. Although I don't know what the use of this wolf pack is for the time being, the blood pact will not do useless work after all, so let's wait and explore slowly. Anyway, the effect of Robb's golden finger was completely explored by himself bit by bit. Well, it's currently on the recommendation. Please vote for me, follow me, thank you. PS. The rhythm of the last few chapters is relatively slow, which can be regarded as a plot foreshadowing, and the passionate war plot will follow. Guess who it is aimed at? Chapter 24. Chaos in the North. Go. Charge. The one who kills the most enemies will get to choose the spoils and women first. Haha, that must be me. On the trade road from Horwood City to White Harbor, a group of hundreds of cavalrymen with the flag of the Bolton family suddenly rushed out of the woods near the trade road, holding guns and swords, and heading towards a caravan in front. This caravan consists of 12 carriages and dozens of riders, which is considered a large caravan in the north. The experienced caravan leader was not too panicked. He frowned and glanced at the flag of the Bolton family. While asking everyone to speed up, he immediately decided to let his men abandon 3 carriages of less value. However, this group of Bolton family cavalrymen did not rob the 3 carriages that were abandoned in place. They came straight towards the caravan that was fleeing in panic. Something's wrong. They are not here for money. They are purely targeting us. Stop moving. Surround the carriages in a circle, and everyone surrounds the carriages and prepare for battle. The caravan leader, who has been running back and forth between the north and the south for more than 10 years, has an absolutely upper middle level of judgment. He immediately stopped the caravan from fleeing and arranged simple but effective defense measures to face the cavalry attack. However, the mercenaries and free cavalry he recruited were no match for the elite cavalry of the Bolton family. The battle was over soon. After half of the caravan members died, the remaining members all surrendered. Snap, snap. A sound of horse hooves rang out, and several cavalrymen came to the caravan members who had surrendered, and were kneeling on the ground, surrounded by the Bolton family cavalry. Lord Ramsay. Greetings to the Lord. Lord, everyone is here except the dead. Seeing the newcomer, the Bolton family cavalrymen all greeted him, and his subordinate Alan reported the situation to him immediately. Yes. Ramsay nodded, then smiled and asked the kneeling man, who is the leader of the caravan? Lord Ramsay, I'm the leader of the caravan. I went to the Dreadfort to do business before, and we greeted each other. Do you remember? The kneeling caravan leader heard Ramsay's question and quickly stood up to answer while raising his head to let him see clearly. "Oh, it's you? Then I'll treat you well today." Ramsay smiled sinisterly, turned to Alan behind him and said, "Set up a skinning rack. Let my acquaintance enjoy it first." "Oh, do it with better skills. Let him enjoy it more." No, Lord Ramsay, I'll give you all the goods. I have other assets. I want to redeem my life. Please spare my life." The caravan leader heard that Ramsay was going to skin him. Even though he had traveled a lot and was experienced, he couldn't help but tremble with fear and beg for mercy with tears on his face. "Very good. You are indeed a valuable person." Ramsay heard this and nodded to the caravan leader with a smile on his face. Then seeing the caravan leader showing a relaxed expression of escaping death, he said to Alan with a bad taste, "Don't waste his valuable body later. Feed it to my hounds." As you say. Alan, who had followed Ramsay for a long time, smiled at the right time and led people to drag the caravan leader away. No. Ramsay Snow, you bastard son of a bitch. I curse you. I curse you to die more miserably than me in the future. The leader of the caravan who was dragged away begged for mercy at first, but later he knew that he could not escape death, so he began to curse. Ramsay showed an exaggerated expression of fear, scratched his ears, and said to the captives kneeling on the ground, "Your leader scolded me. I'm very scared. So, I will kill you all to prevent you from making me die more miserably than him." "No, my lord. Please be mercenary. My lord, we are just mercenaries. When your cavalry comes, we surrender immediately. My lord." The captives kneeling on the ground, hearing Ramsay's words, wailed and begged for mercy. "Hey, Lord Ramsay, please don't forget our purpose today." At this time, a young rider in the crowd riding with Ramsay spoke. "Oh, dear Sam. If you hadn't reminded me, I would have almost forgotten it." Ramsay turned around and made an expression of sudden realization and replied to the young rider. Sam hated Ramsay in his heart, but he still said respectfully, "It's my honor to remind you, otherwise I will fail the purpose of my master sending me here. Yes, I can't disrupt the arrangement of that master." Ramsay nodded respectfully in agreement, then turned to the captives and said, "You are lucky today. I, Ramsay of the Bolton family, declare that half of you can survive. From now on, the last half standing can leave." Ramsay smiled and announced his decision, then turned around and left. A mercenary who understood what he meant took out the dagger hidden in his boots and directly stabbed it into the neck of a caravan member next to him. This scream seemed to wake up all the captives, and they beat each other with fists, heads, and mouths. They tried to make the caravan members who had once traveled with them never stand up again. Listening to the roars and screams behind him, Ramsay pulled a smile from the corner of his mouth. Sam looked at the prisoners who were beaten with a sullen face, and his hands holding the reins of the horse were clenched tightly, and the veins on his hands burst. He took a deep breath, still remembering his mission, and chased in the direction of Ramsay with 3 wolf guards with the same expression behind him. There are 2 routes for merchants in the north. One is to take land transportation and go to the southern regions through the Bay of Kalin. The other is to go through the White Harbor in the Bay of Bight for sea transportation. White Harbor is the main trading port in the north. It is located at the estuary, where the White Blade River merges into the Bay of Bight. It is an ice-free port. Even in winter, people can trade with southern port cities and the 9 free cities through here. Newcastle is a residence castle of the Manderley family. It is located on a mountain within the walls of White Harbor. The castle stairs lead directly from the Wolf's Den at the bottom of the mountain to the new castle on the mountain. Lord Wyman Manderley, who was as heavy as King Robert, was sitting in his luxuriously decorated study, frowning as he looked at the Raven letter in his hand. All the caravans heading to White Harbor were attacked by the Bolton cavalry, including the caravans directly under other noble families. Lord Wyman, who was silent while looking at the letter, suddenly looked up and asked Mr. Theamer beside him. "Yes, Lord Wyman." Mr. Theamer, with grey hair, nodded and continued slowly. "Only half of the caravans that encountered the Bolton cavalry survived. According to them, the cruel Ramsay Snow forced them to kill each other to survive. Instead of killing them all, they let them go." "Did they use their mouths to spread the news?" Lord Wyman turned a gem ring on his hand, his eyes full of contemplation. It can be seen that his shrewdness is proportional to his size. Have the Stark family and the Bolton family responded? Lord Wyman continued to ask. The Stark family has not responded yet. It should be, because after Lord Eddard became the Hand of the King, Lord Robb has just taken over as acting Lord of the city and is still sorting out the internal affairs of Winterfell. The Bolton family did respond. Lord Robb has replied that the bastard Ramsay defected with some of the family's cavalry and he is currently in pursuit. Oh, what a joke. Robb Bolton led the Bolton family army, which is the second most powerful in the north, and it has taken him so long to catch up with his bastard son. Lord Wyman chuckled and continued to look at the letter in his hand, muttering, I seem to smell something bad. Lord Eddard has just taken office in the distant King's Landing, and the young wolf has just taken over Winterfell, and this chaos has occurred in the north. But this Lord Leech of the Bolton family has always been good at calculating. He shouldn't use such clumsy means, right? There will be another chapter updated in the evening. Thank you for voting. Dear readers who are following the book, please continue to support this book. Thank you. Chapter 25 The Time is Ripe, Part 3. Lord Wyman is right. There are many things that don't make sense in this matter. The caravan that was hit at the beginning was said to have about 100 Bolton cavalrymen. But as attacks on caravans continued, the caravans directly under the noble families sent more cavalrymen to guard them. The city of Caho even sent out 300 cavalrymen to guard the caravan, but they were still robbed. Could that Ramsay and his defecting cavalrymen eat up all these caravans? Mr. Theomer nodded and followed Earl Wyman's words and told the problem he saw. Of course it couldn't have been done by that bastard boy and his defecting cavalry. Who else could it be except Lord Leech? Lord Wyman spoke without hesitation. He shook his head and didn't want to discuss this topic anymore. Mr. Theomer, how about the matter that the young wolf lord asked us to buy mere ointment for him? We contacted a familiar salt merchant ship and they agreed to transport a shipload of ointment. However, a deposit of 200 gold dragons is required first. Lord Robb has not responded to when the deposit and payment will be paid. Mr. Theomer reported the latest situation. At the end, he looked at Lord Wyman, waiting for his answer. After turning the gem ring on his hand a few more times, Lord Wyman said, since the young wolf has written to inquire about this, he should need this batch of ointment very much. We will pay the 200 gold royals for him first, and let them bring the ointment back as quickly as possible. Yes, my lord. Tell Winterfell about this by sending a raven. By the way, increase the price of the ointment by 50%, which is considered as expedited goods and interest. Mr. Theomer nodded to Lord Wyman and said with admiration, not only have we helped Lord Robb and made him owe us a favor, but we can also make money by the way. You are worthy of being Lord Wyman. Lord Wyman smiled on his fat face, waved his hand to let Mr. Theomer go to work quickly, and then closed his eyes to think about what might happen in the north in the future. In the area between the White Knife River and Sheep's Head Mountain, there is a small forest that is not very dense, and a group of thousands of Bolton family soldiers are camping. Father, do we need to arrest the 4 Winterfell cavalrymen that the wolf cub sent to supervise me? Ramsay stood behind Robb Bolton, bowed slightly to show respect and asked, just send someone to keep an eye on them. You can't break up with the wolf cub now. Robb looked to the northwest outside the woods, as if he saw Winterfell. He continued, you did a good job this time. You didn't directly reject his plan to let you rob the northern caravan and then put the blame on our Bolton family. Instead, he secretly sent someone to tell me so that we can follow his plan and implement a plan that is beneficial to us. Of course, Father, the Bolton family is my foundation. Without the Bolton family, I would just be a bastard that can be seen everywhere in the north. However, now all the nobles in the north know that it is our Bolton family that is robbing them. Our situation will be very difficult in the future. Hearing this, Ramsay smiled and expressed his loyalty to his father. Who said we were robbing the caravan? After a while, the northern nobles will know. It was Lord Robb, to whom they are loyal, who forced you to carry out the robbing and framed our Bolton family. The 4 Winterfell soldiers are the evidence. Father, what if these 4 people refuse to testify? Robb heard Ramsay's words suddenly turned to look at his son and said softly, "Naked people have few secrets, but skinned people have no secrets. I believe they will tell the truth. Yes, they will definitely tell it, father." Ramsay knew the power of his ancestral skinning skills. After nodding in agreement, he continued to ask, "But, in this way, we will directly tear our faces with Winterfell. Lord Eddard is now the hand of the king in King's Landing. If he comes back, does our Bolton family still fear the Stark family?" Two Red Kings once broke into Winterfell and skinned many members of the Stark family. Besides, it is not so easy for Eddard Stark to escape from the troubles in King's Landing. Robb has always had great ambitions in his heart, and he is quite cunning. Although he would use some tricks in private, he always behaved very loyally in front of Eddard. The reason why he personally went to the scene this time can be said to be to seize the opportunity of the new and old lords of Winterfell, and at the same time, he unexpectedly received a secret letter from the Lord in the West. Robb thought that he could try to disrupt the situation in the north first, so that he could benefit from it. By the way, have all the looted goods been transported back during this period? Also, what did you tell the little wolf cub? They have all been sent back to the Dreadfort, father. I told him that due to the shortage of manpower, all the goods were temporarily hidden in a safe place. I also took that Sam to see it. Of course, except for a box of goods specially shown to him, the rest were empty boxes. Very good. The looted goods this time are enough for us to recruit thousands of more infantry, or train 1,000 elite cavalry. They will become weaker and weaker, and we will become stronger and stronger. I believe that it won't be long before our Bolton family will rule the north again. At that time, I will give you the surname Bolton. Demeric has unfortunately passed away, and you will be my heir in the future. I look forward to that day, father. Okay, in addition to the people you brought with you, I will leave you another 300 cavalry. There should be fewer and fewer caravans that can be looted later. Tomorrow, I will return to the Dreadfort to deal with the goods. In the meeting hall of Winterfell, a piece of paper written in Chinese was placed in front of Robb. It says Lannister, Bolton, free, three-eyed raven, etc. Robb seems to have no idea. He shook his head, picked up a dagger next to him, and started playing with it. Although this dagger looks plain, it is made of lost Valyrian steel, and has a dragon bone as the handle. For Robb, this dragon bone dagger was purely sent by Littlefinger. When the assassin carrying the dragon bone dagger sneaked into the main castle of Winterfell at night, he was greeted by Bloodwind with his wolf pack. After knowing that Brandon was assassinated, Catelyn was extremely angry and immediately went to King's Landing to find Eddard. Robb certainly couldn't let her fall into the whirlpool of King's Landing again. After analyzing the pros and cons, Robb made a promise that he would definitely find the mastermind behind the scenes, which dispelled her idea. But she was still worried, and finally entrusted Sir Roderick to go to King's Landing to tell her husband Eddard about the matter. Lord Robb, today the ravens of various noble families have accused the Bolton family of attacking the northern caravan. If this matter is not resolved quickly, not only they, but also the common people below will start to get restless. After all, many supplies in the north rely on these caravans. Mr. Luwin, holding a handful of raven letters, finally couldn't bear it anymore and asked Robb, who was concentrating on playing with the dagger. "Well, I understand, Master Luwin. Is there anything else?" Robb heard this, without even raising his head, but just nodded in response. Seeing that he was like this when talking about the Bolton family, Master Luwin, who was already used to it, shook his head and continued. "A letter from White Harbor said that Lord Wyman paid a deposit of 300 gold royals for us to buy Ms. ointment. Lord Eddard officially took office as the King's Hand and presided over the royal meeting. King's Landing held a regular tournament to celebrate. Robb, the Karstark family, Earl Rickard is here with hundreds of cavalry." Just as Mr. Luwin was reporting various miscellaneous matters, Theon hurried into the meeting hall, shouting loudly, exclamation mark. Robb, who had been concentrating on studying the dragon bone dagger, heard Theon's shouting, and suddenly his fingers trembled flexibly. The dragon bone dagger was turned over several times, and held in his palm, and fiercely stabbed at the two Chinese characters Bolton written on the paper in front of him. Robb raised his head, and said to himself with burning eyes, "The time is finally ripe. The promised additional chapters have been completed. Please take a little time every day to vote and read this book. Thank you for your support. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.